Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
To give you a little background about myself, I'm a female from a South Asian country. That being said, there are some states which are relatively safe. 2019 had been a rough year for me, but by October I started feeling rather better and decided to take a solo trip for my birthday. I spoke to some friends and decided to head to this small village down south. My brother helped convince my overprotective mother as he'd already been there. To put her mind at ease, I decided to get pepper spray. Unfortunately, we couldn't find one, so I kept a ball of deodorant and a knife handy. I decided to stay there for 5 days and booked a room at a guest house only for 2 days, thinking I'll check out this guest house that my friend had suggested and hopefully move there. To tell you a little bit more about this village, everyone is extremely friendly and warm, and they have tourists coming from all over the globe. Once I got to the room, I was a little paranoid because it seemed a bit dingy. Forget about a security system, the latch on the door was barely functional. The first night was a bit unsettling, but nothing happened. The next day was my birthday, so I rented a bike and went on exploring the village. Sometime after lunch, I decided to check out the guest house that my friend had recommended, which was a little secluded but extremely peaceful. As I reached there, I was greeted by the owner, who showed me around. This place had big huts on one side and a row of small rooms on the opposite side. I decided to take the latter as it was cheaper and I didn't plan on being in the room much anyway. We exchanged numbers and I told him I'll move in the next day. The next day, I got there and had lunch with the owner and he told me about the history of the place and a bit about himself. I realized that he wasn't around when my friend had been there. I was trying to read him, seeing if I was getting any creepy vibes from him since I was going to spend 2 nights there. I didn't see any red flags in particular. After lunch, I went to a restaurant that was right behind the guest house. I met some of the locals whom I was already acquainted with. Along with them were 2 new guys, one of whom was from my city. The 3 of us instantly clicked and started hanging out. Once it got dark, we came back to my guest house to chill, when the owner told us that he's planning a bonfire with some of his guests/friends who were sitting at another table. An hour passed as we ate and played cards, but those guys didn't seem like they were in the mood for a bonfire and soon left the place. Since the owner had already set things up, we decided to spend some time by the fire with him. We were all sitting and talking up until midnight, when the other 2 boys decided to take off as they weren't staying there. I told the owner that I head back to my room too. He tried to convince me to stay a bit longer, but I didn't want to be alone with him. My room's door had around 4 to 5 locks, but only 2 of them were functional. So I locked them and realized that the windows facing each other did not have any panes and the curtains were made with scraps of thin cloth, which meant anyone could peep inside and see everything. So I went into the bathroom to change and clean up. As soon as I stepped out and started taking my stuff from my bag, I heard someone whisper my name, twice. My heart skipped a beat and I froze for a few seconds. I decided to ignore it and quickly shut all the lights. Before going to bed, I decided to keep the bin right in front of the door, so in case someone tries to open it, it would make some noise. I took out my deodorant and knife and kept it right next to my pillow before laying in bed. I kept looking at both the windows on the side to see if anyone's outside. After about half an hour, the metallic door started rattling violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Instantly, I stood up and got hold of the knife and deodorant. My mouth went dry and my heart started beating fast. I didn't know if I should scream because I only knew of one other girl who was staying in the opposite hut. After what felt like forever, the door stopped shaking and I collapsed into the bed. I checked the windows to see if anyone was walking by, but no one did. I tried to think of what it could have been. Maybe it was just the wind, but the curtains hadn't moved one bit. It had to be a person. I don't know when, but I passed out soon after. I woke up around 6 AM to see that it was almost bright outside. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, when it started happening again. Frantically, I shut up in bed again, ready to attack. But once again, it stopped after a few minutes. I didn't understand what was happening. I went closer to the door and got a look at the bin that I had kept by the door. It had moved away from its original position. Yes, something definitely happened. Not knowing what to do, I decided to go back to sleep. When I got out of the room later, I tried to read the owner's face, but it was just as hard to read as the day before. What worried me the most was that I had to spend another night in that room. I decided to not let that thought spoil the day and went out with the 2 friends I'd made for a trek and then to watch the sunset from a hilltop, where all the locals gathered to play music in the evening, including that owner. My new friends and I went somewhere else after that and then around 10 decided to head back to my guest house for dinner. As I was nearing the hotel, I got a text from the owner asking where I was. I didn't think much of it because it was late and he was probably wondering if I was safe. I didn't reply as we were almost there. When we sat down on the futon, the owner said I was just about to text you and show me the message he typed on his phone. I was just thinking about you. I'm not sure what that meant, so I looked at his face trying to read him and realized he was trying to do the same. Quickly I decided to act normal and told him where we were. We all sat, met a couple more people, ate, smoked, and around 11, the guys decided to head to their guest houses. At that point I got up and told him I'd head to my room too. He looked at the time and asked me why I was ending the night so early. I told him that I was really tired from all that walking and that I wanted to be up early. He didn't push any further as there were other people around. I went back to the room filled with anticipation and dread, but thankfully nothing happened that night. The next day I checked out, but my bus wasn't until 5 p.m. I didn't want to be left alone with the owner, so I met up with the guys, leaving my luggage at the reception, which was also the eating area. When I came back, I picked up my bag and thanked him and left in a hurry. I still have no idea if it was the owner or the only helper that I saw around. Whoever it was trying to forcefully get through my door, let's not meet. I may have been 8 to 9 years old. I lived in a nice little middle-class neighborhood. One of my best friends, Raven, lived across the street diagonally, one house down, so I often spent evenings at her home after school. Raven's mom would always call my mom to let her know I was leaving and to expect me in the next minute or so. This way mom knew to unlock our front door. Often she stood and watched from the screen door to make sure I got across okay. I had begun noticing this beat-up red car, possibly an old Volkswagen or Buick, that would pass by almost every night as I ran back across the street. I would always head home just after dark, so possibly around 8:30 anytime I was leaving Raven's house. It was always rolling super slow, speed limit was 25 miles per hour, and I want to say this vehicle was always passed at maybe half that. One night as I was leaving perhaps a bit later than usual, I stepped out the side door of Raven's house just as the car was about to pass the house completely. It stopped in the road and backed up as I approached the side of the road. The window rolled down just as the car stopped in front of me. A little woman with short reddish brown hair and blue framed glasses was smiling sweetly at me. "Hi sweetheart, it's a little late for you to be out right now, isn't it?" she asked me. Her voice was low and pleasant. "No, mom lets me. I'm just walking home," I replied stupidly. "Oh gosh, how silly of your mom. There's all kinds of bad people out late at night. Where do you live, sugar? I'll give you a ride." Just then, my mom came bursting out the front door and screamed, "Leave her alone," as she began running to me. The woman's pleasant demeanor dropped and I heard her mutter a word, possibly as she slammed her foot on the gas and took off at well over the speed limit. She didn't stop at the nearby stop sign, just blasted through it to make her escape. I got a nice lecture that night, but also a lot of tight hugs. My mom was super glad that she chose to look out the storm door to check on me instead of just letting me wander home. I could have been taken, and she told me as much. I cannot remember if the police were called, but I never interacted with any officers. This doesn't end here though. Like most little kids, I really liked setting up lemonade stands. Like most little kids, I also enjoyed hand making and baking cakes and brownies and cookies, and also selling those at my lemonade stands. About 2 weeks after the prior incident, a beautiful sunny Saturday, mom helped me with the baking and helped me make lemonade and set me up in the front yard with my sign. She had been paranoid ever since the prior incident and had hardly let me out of her sight, aside from school and the bus, and this was no different. She stayed outside with me all while I sold my little treats to passerby, until she had to run to the restroom. It would obviously be a pain to take everything down and bring it inside while she went, and then to bring it all back out and set it up again. She figured I'd be okay for a few minutes, considering it was the middle of the afternoon and usually kidnappers aren't that stupid. Mom left me alone for several minutes when she went to the bathroom and presumably went to grab a snack as she was gone for 10 or so minutes. A familiar face walked up, about 8 minutes in. She appeared from around some bushes down the street. I didn't see her in the distance walking up. I honestly saw her stand up from behind some bushes and brush herself off and begin walking towards me. Her clothes were smart and sophisticated looking, almost like a pantsuit. It was a real clash with how ratty her car had been, but that same placating smile was on her face and her eyes glinted behind the same glasses. "Aw cute, a lemonade stand. Hi again, sweetie. Sorry for bothering you the other night. I didn't realize how close to home you were. Mama told me to not talk to you. Go away." I said it as meanly as I could muster, but mom had rightfully made me so frightened of this woman that I'm sure I just sounded like the scared little girl I was. "Come on now, Mary." She spoke my real name, first and last, and my eyes got big. "I'm a friend of your parents. I live down the street. Remember, we met at the pool this past summer. I had no recollection of her. If you're their friend, why did you leave so quick?" "Mom," I began shouting for my mother. This made her crouch down in front of my table, eye to eye with me. "We don't need to do that. I just want to talk to you. You like to bake, right? I have a really fancy kitchen with a nice baker's oven. All sorts of cool gadgets to make baking cupcakes and stuff like this super fun." "No, no, no, Mama." I stood up and pushed the table into this woman and started running for the front door. This woman kicked the folding table away and started to chase me until my mom appeared in the doorway. She flung the door open and I barreled into her, and the woman stopped running and stood in the yard. "What are you doing to my daughter?" my mom shouted at her. "My God, your child is rude. I was just trying to buy a cupcake and she shoved the table into me and ran. Now I have lemonade all over my clothes. The woman lied through her teeth. I don't think she was expecting my mom to come back. That's the lady from that night in the car. I was now trying to get around my mom and hide behind her. My mom pulled out her cell phone, and this time I know she called the police. The woman immediately ran off back the direction she came. The cops appeared. One took statements while the other one patrolled the neighborhood searching for her. They ended up finding her car parked at the grocery store that was up the road about half a mile at the other end of the neighborhood. They waited for her to show up and claim it. She never did. They couldn't find her. So, random lady in the red beater, please, let's not meet again. This happened a couple years ago when I was 16. I had just recently got my first job at a chain sandwich shop. It was located in the shopping mall outlet at the far end. There were quite a few businesses around it, including a restaurant down the way and a super Target on the other side of the mall on the far end of the parking lot. My parents were always super protective and taught me at a young age to be aware of my surroundings and protect myself, and rarely even let me walk alone to begin with. On this particular day, I had left my phone at home because I wasn't allowed to have it at work and had a daily time limit on it anyways. Thanks, Mom. I had ended up finishing up my shift early, and my mom was still shopping at the Target, so told me to go ahead and walk over to meet her. I began walking towards the Target and had to wait for passing cars. One silver car stopped and let me walk across. I smiled and waved thank you, and the man in the car did the same, and turned on the street going the direction I was walking. I didn't think anything of it, as it was a relatively busy parking lot and most of the shops are over on the other side by the Target. A minute or two goes by and I spot the same car now driving in the opposite direction towards me. I make a mental note but think I'm just overreacting. That is, until he turns back around. At this point I'm concerned and notice I'm now a part of the mall that's a little less crowded with a more empty parking lot. I get this uneasy feeling in my stomach that he's following me, and to test my hypothesis, I switch my direction. Instead of heading towards the Target, I walk towards the restaurant. The car immediately turns into the parking lot. I switch into freak out mode and speed walk to the front doors. In my time of panic, I didn't realize that the parking spots for the restaurant were completely empty. I pull on the doors and they're locked. They were apparently closed on Sundays. At this point, the man in the gray car was parked in the lot in front of the restaurant watching me. The way he was parked, I would have to pass this car to go back on the path I originally was on. I stand there a moment pretending not to notice and think about what to do next. I obviously don't want to walk any closer to the car than I already was. I decide to cut through the side shrubbery of the restaurant and head towards the closest shop I could find. The gray car comes out of the parking lot still following me, and I bolt into the dollar store across from the restaurant. I see the gray car park and I walk up to one of the cashiers and explain what happened, and I ask if I could use her phone to speak to my mother. She says of course and tells me to stay in here until my mom comes to get me. I call my mom and tell her about the car, and she of course freaks out. By this time, I think the man in the car caught on because he eventually backs out and leaves. My mom shows up and thanks the cashier lady, and we drive to the Target. Aside from us both being shaken up, we were okay. It definitely ruined me for walking alone again. Now that I'm an adult and live on my own, I carry pepper spray and a plucking knife anywhere I go just in case. I rarely walk anywhere unless I'm with someone or it's only a few minutes away. It still scares me today to think of what could have happened, or what that man's intentions were. So, to the man in the gray car, let's not meet again. This all happened last summer when me and my childhood best friend, we were both 15, decided to go camping for her birthday. We were originally supposed to be a 5 to 6 person group, but it ended up being just the two of us. So we met at her grandma's house, me with my scooter and her with her mom in a car, and headed to our camping site for the next 2 nights. The camping site was very deep in the woods beside a public trail, but there were still neighbors who had a lot right next to the one we were using. My friend's mother warned us to not go take a walk on the left side of the trail, which would lead us to the weird and possibly dangerous neighbors. We obviously listened since we didn't want any trouble at all. So after unpacking most of our stuff, her mother left, letting us alone in the middle of the woods with only a 50cc scooter to get out in case of emergency, which, don't get me wrong, is very useful but not very fast. So we started doing our thing, eating junk food, listening to music, catching up on both of our lives, since we haven't talked in a very long time. She moved away a few years prior to this, so we don't get the chance to talk to each other that much. The sun was slowly going down. It was getting darker and darker. We were talking and singing when we heard an ATV coming on the trail. It was coming from the left side. Me and my friend freaked out a little, so we basically just locked the door and ran to the back of the camper. The ATV stopped on our camping site. We could hear 2 adult males talking to each other about whatever knows what. It took something like 5 minutes, but they finally left. At this point, we weren't that worried because we thought it was just some curious people who wanted to know if there was anyone in the camper, which had already been robbed in the past, so we just continued our stuff, listening to music and all. By this time, it was already dark outside and the moon wasn't out yet, leaving us with no other lights than our candle. There was no water and no electricity in the camper, which also meant we had to go outside to use the bathroom. Fortunately, it was a full moon night, so eventually the moon would come out and we will be able to see outside pretty well. So again we were talking, everything else was quiet, no music, no animal noises either, and then we heard an ATV coming our way once again, so we turned out all the candles and stopped talking, waiting in silence. We quickly sat on the ground of the camper to make sure no one could see us from outside because the curtains were still opened, and then we listened. The ATV stopped a little before coming up to our camping site and everything went silent. A couple minutes after that, we could hear footsteps all around the camper. Yes, it could have been an animal, but with the ATV sound and what happened after, we know it wasn't an animal. The steps eventually faded away. We then quietly moved to the back of the camper, closing every curtain, making sure the door was locked. We brought 2 knives with us. We eventually heard another noise. We immediately went silent and we hid the candlelight. We then heard the noise again. It was like someone was trying to open the camper door just by turning the handle. We then heard footsteps going all the way around the camper and we could hear the person testing every single window to see if any of them were opened. We were almost crying. After they tested all the windows, the steps faded away with maybe 1 hour of tranquility and silence during which we were quite panicking. When we finally calmed down, we heard noises at the door once again, but this time, it sounded more like someone was trying to unlock the door with the lockpick. We could hear the lockpick inside of the mechanism and then the person would try to turn the handle. After 5 minutes of trying, the person probably got mad and started turning the handle angrily and punching and kicking at the door. We were freaked out. I had my brand new iPhone in one hand, hesitating on calling the cops or no. No service was available at this location, but 911 can still work most of the time. The noise was still going on at the door and all around the camper. This lasted for at least 30 minutes. The person was trying every window and then at some point gave up once again. We then started to make up a plan. The noise at the door happened a couple more times. We acted as if we were more than 2 people in the camper, so we started acting like my friend's mother and sister were there, as if one of our guy friends was there, and we acted like the noise woke us up and we screamed at the people to go away and we got mad. Our plan worked, I guess, since we heard multiple people running away. The next morning, after making sure everything was okay, we got out of the camper and we saw that a bunch of the plants next to the camper had been stepped on. There were footsteps everywhere in the mud and everywhere around the camper. Since it was daytime and my friend's mother was supposed to come back to see us, to make sure we were okay, we decided to sit outside waiting for her. We were walking around waiting when a car slowed down in front of our campsite. It never stopped, but we saw the driver staring at us. Then maybe 10 minutes later it went by again and again and again, always giving us that menacing stare. When my friend's mother finally arrived, we asked her if anyone tried to prank us or make a joke, and she went on and asked every possible suspect, and no, it was not a prank. Everyone promised that if it was them, they would have told us, but it really wasn't them. We didn't sleep alone this time. We had someone else come sleep with us for the second night. I'm just glad they weren't able to open the door to the camper. So I'm 23 now, but when this happened, I was 17. In my last year of high school, I was the art girl. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement for our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at a local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So for my school, I had to get a half-hour bus to the center of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course and this happened the 5th week. The class was really interesting and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 PM and it was pretty dark by the time I got out. So 4 weeks walking there and back, uneventful. 5th week walking there, totally fine. 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. 5 minutes at the bus stop, it was very freaky. So the stop I had to wait at was outside the expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops and it's also pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So I must have been one of the first people there, so I'm standing just outside the shelter because I'm smoking, and obviously I don't want to be a jerk and make other people breathe in my smoke. So there's only about a few minutes left to my bus and I'm minding my business when this guy comes and stands super close to me. Like, not as in infringing a bit of my personal space here close, like literally I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s and just had that general creepy vibe and looked really grubby. So obviously I'm a bit freaked out and sidestep away. So does he. I look at him and he has the creepiest smug grin. But at this point I'm like, okay, he's trying to freak me out and he knows I know. I step away again, like fairly far away this time. He follows me again and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I do not know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or their own conversations. I guess it must have been just that. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I don't want to overreact, maybe it's just a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. So anyway, it gets worse. After dodging this creep for a few more moments as time dragged in slow, finally this bus comes around the corner. I know if I get on this bus before this guy, he is going to sit next to me, which is what I want to avoid. So politely I gesture and say after you. He gives me that creepy look again and says no, you go first. I insist but he refuses again. There's a big queue now and I don't want to hold anyone up, so reluctantly I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are only in pairs, so there's no way he could sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty, so where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. I'm just sitting trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair and his hands are on it. I pulled out my phone and tried to text my mom, but the sending bar would just stick. It happened to literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening and that I thought that if I got off this bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus up a long straight road, so my friend calls my mom and tells her what's happening. My mom then calls me and relays what my friend had told her. Now, I'd been on this bus for about 15 to 20 minutes and my stop was coming up in 5. It's not a big city. My area is suburban and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. I'd never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, my mom called. I just said to her, I will be getting off this bus in 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now and meet me. As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop. Literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang into my arm and drag his body hard across me as he walks past. Stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he actually had bad intentions, or if he just got off on a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact he pressed the button as soon as I confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he did intend on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. This happened this past year, my senior year of undergrad. I attend a big university with 2 bus stops. The first one is for a smaller portion of the school, and the second one is the main one that people use, but they're pretty far apart. I got out of class and was next to the small bus stop around sunset. This guy, I'll call him Eric, comes up to me of all people in line and starts asking if this bus would take him to one of the student housing areas. It was kind of odd because it was partway into the year, but whatever, he seemed genuinely confused. I explained yes, this bus would take him there and his stop is the same one I get off of. He asked if he can wait in line with me and he was nice, so I said sure. We're talking and waiting for the bus and it doesn't come, so I decide to walk to the main stop and he follows. Again, at this point it's not creepy because it's just small talk. We walk to the other bus stop and we just jump on one over there. Eric sits next to me and is berating me with questions that I'm now answering very shortly. Then everything he says is flirty, like, yeah, come see my pool so we can tan, let's work out together and get sweaty in the sauna. All very weird and random, and I just don't say much because everyone on the bus can hear the conversation. He then asks for my number, which I lie about, but this guy says okay, let me call you. Obviously, I get a call and Eric's just confused and I just say oh my bad. I knew he would call it again, so I just gave the right number. Now I'm regretting telling him I stop, but I still get off with him. He's continuing the flirty comments, but the street I'm parked on is opposite of his route home. I say goodbye and wait till he's out of my sight and to get in my car and drive away. At this point it's late and he was gone, so I just went home and forgot about it. He texted me a couple times the next few weeks, all of which I ignored. Eventually he stopped and I forgot about the encounter. Fast forward a few months and I rarely use the bus anymore because I have a parking pass. One day after class I decide to go to the Vons right next to my original bus stop. I park in the farthest row because it's very busy and my car is in the middle of the row. I'm on a quick mission, so I'm rushing down the first aisle and some guy turns around to check me out, but I ignore it and keep going. I felt the guy's eyes on me still and thought, how do I know this dude? Then I get in line and there he is at the front of the line grinning at me. It's Eric from the bus and I'm like, screw this, so I switch lines. He checks out way before I do and leaves. I get my stuff and walk out to my car. I was parked just far enough that you couldn't see my car, just the direction it was in. As I get closer, there's Eric standing right in front of my car. This was disturbing because he wasn't waiting at the door of the store or in the middle of the lot. Nope, right at my car. He positions himself in between me and my car and he's grinning and he says, "I know you." I played dumb saying sorry, you must have me confused. He says, "No, you're from school." I say, "No, that's not me, I don't go to that school." He believes me and starts aggressively asking me out. I say, "No thank you, I have a boyfriend." He says, "Okay, so you can't have friends?" And I look at him and say sarcastically, "Do you really want to just be friends?" He just grins at me and replies no. He then says, "Don't worry, when you're single I will find you." The way he said it was very unnatural and creepy. He finally gets out of my way and lets me into my car. He watches me leave the parking lot and I drove to my brother's house just because of how unsettling that encounter was. On one occasion, I came from a group project and had to take the bus. It was crowded when I got on, so I sat in the first seat I saw. I could hear the conversation behind me and instantly recognized Eric's voice. The girl he was talking to seemed to be really into the conversation surprisingly. But now here I was on a bus to a school that I told this creep I didn't go to. I tried to get off quickly but somehow Eric and the girl got off before me. I'm relieved and try to keep a distance. I don't see them anymore and turn a corner and there he is again waiting for me. He doesn't move though, he just grins at me and says, "Hi, are you going that way or this way by now?" He used my real name and the fake one I used when I played dumb at Vaughn's. I just walk away and call my friends to meet on campus. The shelter in place was issued the next week and I moved home. Luckily I never have to see Eric again. This story is from my days as a gas station clerk. This happened during a football Saturday, so the store was full of people from the moment I walked in. Most of the night is a blur because it was just cashiering for the first 6 hours of my shift. It was around 3 AM and things were finally starting to taper off. There were only a dozen or so people in the store. I just usually kept my head down and focused on the transaction in front of me so I wouldn't get overwhelmed, only looking up now and then to make sure the store isn't on fire and no one's stealing the wine case. I wasn't even looking around when I saw him. I just saw something strange in the corner of my eye and spun my head to look at him. When I got a good look, I was startled. This guy's skin was almost translucent white and he was soaking wet. His teeth were gritted and looked too big for his mouth. He was shaking as fast as he walked past the counter. I could hear the bathroom door slam from around the corner. I went back to my transaction and told myself that I needed to remember exactly where he was. I couldn't forget he was in the bathroom. I rang out the next few people, watching for him the whole time. After another 10 minutes or so, the store was suddenly empty. Customer rushes tend to be like that, from 100 miles an hour to just nothing. I knew he was still in the bathroom. I thought about going to knock, but I felt repelled. I had no intention of going near that door. I look at the clock and it's nearing 4 AM, which is when I need to start brewing coffee for it to be ready when my manager comes in. The coffee grounds are all in the supply closet behind the counter, so I tell myself it's totally fine to go get them. It satisfies both my paranoia and my arrogance as well. I'm still doing my job, but doing something I believe to be tactically the best move. If for whatever reason the guy opened the bathroom door and tried to run behind the counter and do something to me, I could shut the door and lock it from the inside. Besides, the bathroom doors are old and loud. I can easily hear them open from inside the closet, so I can just come out and wait near the panic button until he leaves. This all seemed like a very good idea at the time. So I decide to go get the coffee packets and I'm listening carefully while I load up on all the flavors I need. I figure I will only be a minute or so I don't even turn the lights on. I'm listening carefully and I don't hear anything. I still don't hear anything. Then I hear a weird noise. It sounds like the water pipes in the back hissing at first, but it's too ragged. I suddenly realize the noise is breathing, and it's getting louder. Then it's right on top of me. That's when I stood and turned to leave, and saw him in the doorframe. We just stood there both staring back at each other. Later when my manager reviewed the footage, she saw him leave the bathroom by slowly pushing the door open. Without making a sound, he had wandered behind the counter and peeked into her office, stepping in far enough to trigger the automatic light. After that, he had wandered behind the food service counter before making his way to the open supply closet door. The next thing she saw on camera was me flipping out. I stepped backwards, my body shaking so hard my knees almost buckled. At this point, I think he realized how absolutely horrifying this entire scenario was to me. He put up his hands and started apologizing awkwardly. He was really twitchy and still gritting his teeth. I basically went on autopilot for a moment and said I wouldn't talk to him until he got out from behind the counter area. He walked backwards until he was barely on the other side of the employee's only entrance, standing next to the soda machine. He began asking for an iPhone charger, telling me he was lost. He said he had no money and just needed to charge his phone here until he could call for help. I told him I don't have an iPhone charger and I couldn't help him. He sighed and looked down for a moment, seeming to think about what to do. Then he flipped his head back and screamed as loud as he could. He then punched the soda machine hard. I backed up and ran around the counter, up to where the panic button was under the register. I watched him as he walked around the store, punching the walls and kicking the counters and screaming. I heard myself shouting over and over, "Get out right now." After a second he stopped and turned around to look at me. He quietly apologized before wandering out of the store and running off into the dark. At this point I was shaking, but tried to pick up and keep working. I started brewing the coffee, checking the windows to see if he was out in the parking lot, but I couldn't see him. After another few minutes, a regular came in and told me a strange man had come up to him asking for a ride. He said the guy was soaked and his teeth were gritting. That's when I decided to call the police. They found him in the parking lot next door, screaming and punching the moving trucks. They took him to sober up and calm down. They informed me that he was very sorry for losing his cool and he was just very drunk and very lost. He had come from out of state for the game and got separated from his friends. In the end, nothing bad happened, but it made me realize that something easily could have. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. My skin still crawls thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town, didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the one my folks paid for during undergrad behind. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights he would end up ahead of me, some behind or beside. At every light he positioned himself so he could stare at me, either directly or in one of his mirrors. His gaze was unwavering and my anxiety rose. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. Finally, at a red light where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, unwavering stare. He saw that I was terrified and he was following me, and he was trying to force me to pull over. At one point I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow a couple of cars ahead of him thinking I could shake him. Nope. He went around the cars at the light and ran the red and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I'd hoped to lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment to keep following. At another light where he was beside me, I pulled through the light and then he turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red to follow me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction, in a new city, I really didn't know what to do, so I turned on some music and forced myself to sing along and forced myself to go to the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of the lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked out front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted because something told me this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. He was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch him. The police got the surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dodging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw my surveillance footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough to grab my elbow. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck, waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. My heart sank. I was able to remember 6 of 7 digits of his plate and the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said she said since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particular unlawful and was a losing case to try to charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer and went on with my life. I had no idea what this guy did just a handful of months later until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted the law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case and, after verifying some things about his vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making stuff up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but qualified her statement by saying at least you don't have to worry about him anymore because he got life without parole. I only wish something could have been done when he terrorized me. perhaps things would have been different for Sandy. So yeah, creepy murderous stalker crazy dude, let's not ever meet again. I go for a short run every night, right after sundown, when it's finally cool out. I always take the exact same route, a loop through a quiet and sparsely populated neighborhood, and now I realize how easy of a target that's made me. A short section of the route passes by an unlit park. A couple of weeks ago, I'd seen a guy hanging out behind a truck that was parked next to the entrance, and it was so unusual to see someone else up there that I decided to be extra cautious, turn around, and head back home. I didn't get close enough to get a good look at his face. A few days later, I saw what looked like the same guy by the park again. I figured I was probably just being paranoid, but I decided to turn around again just in case. I hadn't noticed any activity by the park in the last several days, so I resumed my normal route and didn't even think about the guy I'd seen up there. Then last night, as I was passing by the park, I had this inexplicable feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't spot anyone nearby, but the park extends into pitch black darkness, so someone could easily hide there unseen. I decided to just keep running, look confident, and try to hurry past the park as quickly as I could. Suddenly, I smelled a strong wave of cologne in the air that immediately put me on edge, and I'm pretty grateful he was wearing it so it tipped me off. After I smelled it, I had no doubt in my mind that there was somebody nearby, but still, I didn't see any movements in front or on either side of me, and I was afraid to turn around. Immediately past the park, there's a bend in the road. There's a house on the corner as you turn down the road. The house has lots of tall bushes in the front yard. I normally run right past those without even thinking of it, but since my gut instinct was blaring like a siren, I quickly moved to the middle of the street as I rounded the corner. I shot a glance behind me to see if anyone had actually been nearby. I saw a man slowly walking through the front yard of the house on the corner, looking towards me. He paused behind the bushes, as if trying to remain hidden. I could see his jeans and a pair of black-white sneakers, but little else. His slow footsteps were so creepy that I can't get the image out of my mind, as if he was trying to be quiet as he could. If I hadn't made the split decision to run into the middle of the street and away from the yard, I would have been within grabbing distance. I turned on the flashlight on my phone, aimed it right at the bushes hoping it'd startle or blind long enough for me to get some distance between us, and started sprinting at full speed down the road. It was probably the fastest I've run in my life. At the end of each block, I glanced behind me to check if the man was there. Fortunately, I lost sight of him. If he decided to sprint after me, I'm not sure what I would have done. From what I could make out, this guy was at least a foot taller than me. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had dissipated and I was shaking with fear. I couldn't sleep at all that night. What scares me most about the whole thing is that I'm 99% sure this was the same guy I'd seen hanging out in front of the park recently, and now I can't shake the idea that he'd been watching me and calculating the right time and path to try to sneak up behind me. He knew that I always ran past there around the same time. The thought that he was probably watching me from the darkness in the park last night before quietly moving out of it and starting to follow me makes me sick. Needless to say, I won't be running past the park at night anymore, or running alone at night, period. The terror I felt when I turned around and saw the guy's shoes slowly moving behind the bushes and his head facing me is like nothing else I've felt before. I live in a small town, the kind where almost everyone knows each other, and it also really creeps me out to think that this might have been someone I've seen around town in the past. Part of me wishes I could have gotten a better look at his face for the police report. So this encounter took place approximately 10 years ago when I was 15. I was from a suburban area where my part of town was divided into a grid, approximately 8 blocks long and 8 blocks wide. Me and my friend Jesse were walking home from another friend's house who lives on almost the exact opposite of corner of the development from me. We were on the way home, and as usual I walked him to his house and then walked to mine. We noticed a blue Ford Bronco was circling the blocks throughout our walk, but didn't really think anything of it. We got to his house and we hadn't seen the truck for a few blocks. I assumed I had nothing to worry about. I get another 2 blocks or so and I see the truck again. He was parked on the side of the road, but you could hear that his truck was still running. He followed me all the way home, but was sure to not take the exact same route. I got to my front porch and could see he's parked just a few houses down on the same side of the street. I mentioned it to my dad, an absolute mammoth of a man, and he went out to see the truck. He saw it and started walking down to it when it took off. 2 weeks go by and I haven't seen the Bronco since. This walk home was almost a daily routine at this point. We had a snow day from school and just me and my sister were home. I'm playing on the computer when something catches my eye. Directly to my right is a window and there's a man standing in it. Now this window's on the first floor, but still approximately 5.5 feet off the ground, bi-level house. This man's entire head and body still fit the window. He's got curly hair, a full beard, and looks to be pretty big as he fills almost the whole window. We locked eyes and I ran out to confront him. I know, stupid. He ran off down the street to the same blue Bronco parked in almost the same spot as last time. He pulled off faster than I could catch him. This time I called the cops. I gave them as much information as I could, and basically all they said was they'd keep an eye out for him. I showed them where he was, and they were able to confirm it by the footprints in the snow leading to and away from the window. Now what had me a bit concerned was I wore a size 12 shoe. My dad, who was still significantly larger than me at this point, wore a 14, and his shoes were still a bit smaller than the imprints in the snow. Well then, we're screwing with Bigfoot now. A few weeks go by and there hasn't been any more weird encounters. My head's been on a swivel every time I'm out of the house. I don't want to say that I was looking for a problem at this point, but I was. I was kinda hoping that this dude would show up and try something. I was ready for it. I wasn't ready. Me and Jesse were walking home from the same friend's house one night and we saw this Bronco again. Screw it. We're young and stupid dudes, so we figured we're gonna trap him. We went completely out of our way to go to the only dead end in the development to try to get to him once we confirmed he was following us. You never know it was a dead end unless you knew the area because there were never and still aren't any dead end or no outlet signs. I guess he had an idea to what we were doing because he knew where we both lived. He didn't follow us down. We thought it was the perfect plan because of how many moves he'd have to make to turn around. Several cars parked on the street, and it's not a cul-de-sac, just a road with no outlet, and thought we could run up on him when he tried to back out. He outsmarted us that day. The next day on the same trip, from the same friend's house, on the same road we see him again. I walk my friend home and figure screw it, I'm fine. I dare this dude to come out at me, and he didn't. This happened several more times over the next week or two, until the guy decided to make his move. I was on my way home after just leaving Jesse at his house. I got another block before I saw the truck. I'm walking perpendicular to his truck when as soon as I'm in his path, he turns on his lights. I ran up the few blocks to my house and waited on the porch to see where he was and what he was doing. This time he stayed put just a few houses down. I told my dad again and he went out to see. Truck's still there. Me and my dad start walking down to the truck and it's still not moving. This ballsy dude had the audacity to get out of his truck to confront us. Terrible idea. He gets out when my dad is still 25 feet from the truck. I guess my dad is about 6'4" and under 300 pounds with a body built by Bud Light and manual labor. This guy though had some size on him. What I saw next was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life. So my dad's not much of a talker, and at this point he's already got a problem with this guy. The guy gets out of his truck with the most sadistic smile on his face. My first thought is the guy has a gun. I yelled to my dad that he might have a gun, and all he yelled back was, "I got it." Well, he definitely had it. They walked up to each other, and before a word was even said, my dad swung. The dude was done in. Before he even started to crumple, my dad hit him again. He hit his truck and hit the ground. I never saw the guy again, and after just moving back into my parents' old house with my young son, I hope I never do. So big dude with the blue Ford Bronco, I hope you never come back to my window. So this happened about 14 years ago. I was 21, and it was the days of MySpace. I never used my real name online. It was in the mode of constantly posting pictures of me smoking, etc. So yeah, I happened to work at a local sandwich shop, and upon taking an order from a customer, I hear, "Hey, aren't you?" enter my MySpace name. To which I asked why, of course, and he proceeded to tell me his MySpace name, and I realized we have randomly commented on mutual friends' pages. Okay, whatever. He and his friends sit in the dining area and eat their lunch, but before leaving he came back to the counter. I thought he wanted a refill on his drink, so I went to the counter to ask him what he would like. "Would you like to get drinks with me sometime?" I was a little surprised, but fresh out of a bad breakup and was ready to date, so I said sure, why not? I told him to message me online later and we could work it out. Cut to 2 days later, it's Friday, and he picks me up and we head to a bar across town. I had known this bar was there forever as I grew up there, but had never been inside. We were the youngest ones there by about 30 years, and there was literally only 10 people total inside, including us and the bartender. Weird, whatever. We have a few drinks, play some pool, and it's time to leave. I kept my pace and only had 2 cocktails because I didn't want to get drunk with someone I didn't know. He, unbeknownst to me, was about to be pretty tossed, so we leave, not wanting to go home. I agreed to go to his house and hang out some more. He lived with his grandmother at the time and had a pool table. We wandered the house for a bit, him showing me random pictures of him growing up, awards won, etc. We play a game and I let him know I need to be getting home. I lived about 20 minutes away by car. He says he's too drunk to drive and that I should stay. Now, I lived with my mom and we didn't always see eye to eye, so calling her 2 to 3 a.m. and waking her up to ask for a ride was not in my list of plans. I told him fine, I would walk. It would have taken me over an hour to walk home, but I was not about to sleep at this guy's house and would have rather taken my chances. The route home didn't go through any bad areas, and I had been a pedestrian for years at that point, so I was used to walking everywhere and was fine with it. All of a sudden, he can drive and doesn't want me walking home alone. Again, whatever. We get to my house and I thank him for the ride, and now he tells me he is too drunk to drive and can't drive home. The place my mom and I lived in was 3 stories, and I had the whole bottom floor to myself and a makeshift living room with couches, so I figured screw it, sleep it off on the couch and go home in the morning. By now, I had already decided this was going to be the only date we ever went on. Not because of the whole driving situation, but I just wasn't into him. He proceeds to lay on my bed the minute I let him inside like some stray dog or something. So being tired and annoyed and just basically over it, I said fine, I'll sleep on the couch. Well, I don't know how long I was asleep or how he even stayed awake, because it took me forever to fall asleep knowing he was there, and this was all just too weird. I wake up to this guy's hands around my throat. Well, kinda woke up. I remember laying there with my eyes closed and my mind thinking, what's going on? So I pretended to roll over to basically let him know I wasn't unconscious, and he stopped. 20 minutes later, same thing. This time I sat up, pushed him away, and started yelling at him. What are you doing? Get out, now. And the strangest thing was, it was like he wasn't even fully there. His eyes were open, but it's like he was in a trance and wasn't even fully aware of what was happening. I grabbed his keys and wallet off the table, opened the door, shoved him outside, threw his keys and wallet at him, and slammed the door. He never knocked or anything, and I kept the lights off so he couldn't see me watching him through the window, phone in hand ready to call 911. My mom was 2 floors above asleep. He kind of staggered off where I couldn't see him, so I just sat on my bed listening. 30 minutes later, I heard his car start and drive off. I logged onto MySpace right away, blocked him, and blocked his number in my phone. I showed my boss his picture the next day, explained the situation, and just let him know that if I ever saw him walking again, that I was walking to the back until he left, and to just tell him I quit. Never heard from him again. I, a 23-year-old female, grew up in a rural area in Ontario. It was the kind of place where you never lock the doors because you know everyone in town. The all too trusting small town mentality stayed with me once I moved to a big city for university. I got an apartment in a student area with a college nearby and plenty of bars within walking distance. I lived with a guy friend, Roddy, who was a few years older than me from the same small town. I would go to the bars with friends on the weekends and stumble home by myself around 2 AM. One night on my way home, my neighbor, Kyle, and I met in the hallway, both headed to our own places. He was also drunk and good looking. He said hello and invited me inside. I ended up staying the night with him. He was nice, and it was a fun night, if not a little awkward. We didn't exchange numbers, and it didn't seem like we cared for anything to come out of it, so I went home in the morning and that was that. Fast forward to 2 days later. I was asleep in my bed, and my roommate was half asleep on the couch with the TV on. He heard a sound that might have been the door creaking open, but he ignored it in his tired state. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes to see a naked man standing in front of him, lifeless and staring into his eyes. It was Kyle. Roddy tried to talk to him and ask him what he was doing here, but he didn't respond. Roddy ran to my room and said, I think Kyle's here to see you. So I followed him out into the living room and saw completely naked Kyle, staring at us with the most serious and concentrated eyes I had ever seen. Roddy tried to talk to him and asked him to leave, but once again he didn't respond. Instead, he went into our kitchen and opened the fridge. He proceeded to take our butter out and start smearing it all over his face and chest, saying nothing, and still with a completely serious look on his face. Roddy and I ran to my bedroom to talk about what to do. While we were in my room, Kyle walked down the dark hallway that led to us and stood in the dark right before the light of my room could reach him. All you could see was his silhouette, and he started whispering hi, hi, repeatedly. Roddy and I ended up calling the police and staying in my room until they came and took him back to his house. They said he must have been on drugs, but probably wasn't a threat. I agreed I didn't think he was a threat, but I didn't sleep well that night knowing he was a thin wall away from us in that apartment. My family decided to fly across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was off season. It was late November, the weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I called a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality our room was one of the 20 to 30 quaint guest house looking buildings arranged in sort of a horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led back to the street, the other further into the secluded maze of rooms. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and it gets dark. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just wanted to go to sleep. And I did immediately. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. This was horrifically startling as it was on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I've never heard her use before. Then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I could understand. As opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming, "Get him, get him." My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe, further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline. I ran down the other path, towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say, "It's a kid." The explanation: some young teen, tall and lanky as I am in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room, our room. The one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought he was me, assumingly leaving the room. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him when he realized his mistake and panicked. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs this kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So, to the now traumatized kid from Catalina Island, sorry for the misunderstanding. For a bit of backstory, I live in a big city which is mostly a friendly place, but like all cities, it has its rough areas. There are 2 main spots that are known to be particularly rough, and for the first 14 years of my life, I lived in one of those areas. So though it can naturally be a bit uncomfortable, I tend to be pretty unbothered by odd people talking to me in the street. Anyway, I moved from one rough area and moved to a safer one, but it's very close to where I originally lived. I know both of these areas pretty well too, which helped me with what happened 5 months ago. I had some stuff going on in my personal life and going through phases of bad anxiety as it is. I had to make the decision to take some time off of work, but wanted to try and stay in a routine and be productive. I went to the dentist way past when I should have, so I made an appointment and when it rolled around, I walked there. My dentist is in the rough area that I now live close to. On my route home, I have to walk past a pub on a main road which has a super bad reputation. Anything you can think of, it's happened inside or just outside of this pub. Anyway, I noticed someone sat on the bench outside the pub. I have my headphones in but see him saying something, so I assume he's asking me for something and take an earplug out. He asked me if I want to join him for a drink. This was around 11:30 AM by the way. I just said no thanks. Now as soon as I got a few steps away, I had this bad feeling like something was just not right. As I mentioned though, I was going through a phase of bad anxiety, so I chalked it up to just being that. After about 2 minutes, I go to turn left and see the man walking in my direction in the corner of my eye. I told myself it was nothing, but took my headphones out anyway just in case. As I was about to walk through a narrow road that leads to a car park and is always very empty. All of a sudden I hear him shouting at me, "Hey miss, I'm talking to you, wait." He catches up to me and tells me, "I'm not a creep, but you're too beautiful to let go." I try and stay polite but also make it clear I'm not interested. He asked if I was single. I said yes. When he asked what I was doing that night, I said I had no plans. I 100% know I should have lied, and as the truth came out I was really annoyed with myself, but whatever. He seems to get the message and I say I really have to go, so I carry on walking thinking that it's the end of it. So I make my way across this big car park. At the end of the car park is a cycle/pedestrian lane that has a massive wall on one side with 2 lots of steps that lead to a car park to a retail park, and bushes on the other end, and it's super narrow. I get into the lane and hear footsteps like someone is running, probably a jogger. I'm getting paranoid until right behind me I hear, "At least give me your number." I finally start to panic and realize actually it's not my anxiety and this is super shady. I give him my number but change the last digit, and this guy proceeds to attempt to drop call me. Clearly my phone doesn't ring, and then he starts getting annoyed saying I need to give him the right number. He then has his hand basically on my phone, standing way too close to me, and orders me to type his number in and drop call him. Creep now has my number. Still not enough for him, I reiterate that I'm on my way somewhere and seriously need to get going. He then grabbed me by my elbow and I had a massive adrenaline rush. Next thing I knew, I was at the top of one of those sets of steps that lead to a much busier and open space. I ran as fast as I could. Luckily, one of my friends works in one of the stores in the retail park, so I ran over to it practically looking over my shoulder the whole time. I find my friend, visibly shaking, can barely speak. She asks if I'm okay and I just burst into tears. I gather my thoughts and tell my friend what just happened. He's been calling my phone this whole time. She takes my phone and notes his number and then blocks him. She takes me to the staff room and convinces me to file a police report, which I do. Unfortunately though, I found out street harassment is not actually illegal where I live, but because he made physical contact, it might not be a complete lost cause. The police tell me they will be in touch. Now fast forward until around 2 weeks later. A mom's friend who knew about what happened sent her an article and asked her to show me. I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes. It was about a man who had followed a girl and then assaulted her in the same rough area. At the end of the article is a picture. It's him. I haven't heard anything from the police, and since he had already been charged, I figured there wasn't any need for me to contact them again. My heart goes out to the girl, and although currently in jail, I really hope neither of us ever have to face him again. His charge was pretty serious, so he will be there for a long time, thankfully. The following experience happened to me a few years ago when I was on the train home from school. It was around 10 p.m. at night as I had stayed back in a public library to study. One thing you should know is that my train line is particularly dodgy, and you can meet some truly weird people on the train when it's late. When I got into my carriage that night, it was particularly empty, apart from 3 women sitting on the opposite end of the carriage. I sat down and plugged my earphones in to watch YouTube. My train ride usually takes around 45 minutes. About 3 stops into the train ride, and the only other person who had gotten onto my carriage at the time was a man who was wearing construction clothes. He sat near the 3 women, so I assumed he knew them. I turned my attention back to my video. A few minutes later, I noticed that the 3 women who were sitting on the opposite side of my carriage had moved to my side. I didn't really think much of it as I was engrossed in the video I was watching. That's when I noticed someone take a seat opposite of me. It was the man who had gotten on earlier. He asked me my name, but he was giving me a weird vibe, so I pretended like I couldn't hear him. I had my earphones in after all. He then proceeded to tap my knee to gain my attention. There was no use ignoring him, so I removed my earphones and looked at him. He was a big guy, probably around early 40s, and he was clean shaven. He asked me my name, to which I gave him a fake name. He then asked me how old I was. I was in my school uniform at the time, so I told him. He reached out his hand and introduced himself. Not wanting to be rude, I extended my own hand to shake his hand. This is when things started to get weird. His handshake was super weird. His grip was abnormally tight and he seems to pull my hand towards him as he shook it. I quickly withdrew my hand. He then asked me if I had a girlfriend, as he thought I was quite attractive. Alarm bells began to ring in my head, and glanced over at the 3 women who refused to even look over my direction. Seeing as they would be no help, I would just have to look out for myself. He then took out his phone and started showing me a picture of a girl who seemed to look around my age. He then asked me if I thought she was beautiful. Again, not wanting to be rude, I simply nodded and said she was. He then asked me if I would be interested in marrying her. I just started laughing as I thought he was just joking around, but his eyes were dead serious, and he just glared at me. He repeated his question, to which I responded that I did not know her and that it was inappropriate. He suggested that I give him my number so that he could arrange for us to meet. This seriously creeped me out, and I politely declined, stating that I was busy with school and that I was not looking to get into a relationship. As I said this, the train was coming to a halt at a station. I was still 3 stops away from mine, but I decided that it was time for me to get out of the situation. I apologized that this was my stop and that it was nice to meet him. As I got up to leave, he extended his hand for a handshake and thanked me for talking to him. I didn't want to shake his hand, but I did not want to trigger him, so I reached out my hand. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and pulled it towards him. His eyes were full of anger. He then asked, "What, you don't want to marry my daughter? I will break you." I quickly broke the grip and left the carriage. As it was nighttime, there were always police officers patrolling the platforms. I rushed towards one of the officers and told him everything that happened. I then described his clothing and which carriage he was sitting on. While waiting for the next train, the same officer came up to me and told me that officers had picked him up 2 stations down and thanked me for letting him know. Although the officer asked for my details, I was never notified as to what happened to him. I just hope that I never have to experience a man on a train like that in the future. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I was about 19 and had transferred to a college very far from home. My parents had raised me pretty dependent, so it didn't upset me. I saw it as a fun challenge. One of the biggest changes to get used to was not having a car. I could have gotten one, I guess, but it would have just been a hassle to find places to keep it when I wasn't at school, etc., so I just opted for the bus instead. I'm not a big fan of person-to-person interactions, so I always made sure to sit up front, hopefully by myself, with my bag in the other seat, and not only headphones in, but a book open as well, all friendly signals to please go away. Thing is, I'm not that great at actually telling people to go away. I had gotten on the bus to head to the mall for a bit, and I realized someone was talking to me. I paused my music and looked up. A homeless man was asking if the seat was taken. There weren't really a lot of people on the bus, but I felt awkward and very rude saying no, like I was judging him. I didn't want to appear unkind, so I moved my bag and then made a big show of putting my music back on and raising my book up to read. I had to keep pausing my music because the man kept talking to me. I kept trying to downplay it to myself that it was just his idea of small talk, even though the questions pointedly fixated on details about me, my age, how pretty I was, if I had a boyfriend. I lied and said yes, of course, and that didn't dissuade interest at all, and so on. It was a very long 20 minutes. He kept getting closer, never overtly touching or filling the space in a way that I could make an obvious complaint about, but by the time we arrived he was practically faced completely toward me. It was definitely blocking me from moving to another seat. Finally my stop came and I jumped up. He was perfectly nice about moving so that I could get by, or so I thought. Turns out he was actually just getting up himself to get out of the same spot, not pausing for a moment and talking to me. Great. It was the middle of the day on a crowded street, so I didn't feel like I was in imminent danger, and therefore felt that anything other than open welcoming would be the height of rudeness for me. I smiled awkwardly and moved on toward the mall, only for him to fall in step with me, continuing to ask for details about myself and my boyfriend. Being naive, I tried to cut him off with, "Oh, I'm headed to the mall," but of course that only gave him the chance to say, "Me too," and well, we headed there together. He started talking to me about how good of friends we were now and how close he felt to me and so on. Honestly, I checked out a good while ago and was trying to find ways to ditch this guy. I ducked into the first store I saw when I got to the mall and he followed me in. I was at this point not even making full sentences, just mumbling things about, "Oh sorry, I need to," and then I tried to lose him down another aisle. It didn't work. I finally made a turn he couldn't follow quick enough and literally hid behind some shelves waiting for him to go by. I dashed out of the store and he saw me and yelled at me to wait and ran after. I ran down the strip and dashed into a random store and went straight to the back to the dressing rooms. I hid in one of them for as long as I felt that I could, and then I peeked out and saw him in the larger mall area, scanning. He finally moved off down the wrong way and I stayed in the store another half an hour, pretending to look at clothes. I don't know what the shop girls must have thought. I was clearly shaken and to the point of tears, but I had called my mother by that point and was keeping her on the phone. When I left, I ran out of the mall and went around to a different bus stop, in case the man would be back at the first one. I was so scared that he would show up again and this time follow me to my apartment. There's a lot I didn't do right in that situation, but I'm just glad I was lucky enough to lose the guy. I can't say what my job was, because what I did was literally the name of the company, but it had something to do with law and a small basement office. This office had 2 main rooms and a bathroom. The boss worked in the room in the back, while the rest of us, 3 in total, worked in the front. This wasn't a place where clients came and met with us. It was just where we got work done on computers and packages sent before leaving. Oftentimes I worked alone the last 3 hours, which in reality was great. I got to listen to whatever music I want, sing and get stuff done on the computer. On occasion my boss would come to pick something up or just get a bit more work done. And on this day he did, but he came in with an older gentleman that I didn't recognize. My boss explained that the man was a customer from one of the companies on the top floor and he left only to realize he really needed to go to the bathroom and asked to use ours. My boss stuck around near my desk until the man left and then got to work. As I continued to work, I began to cough and wheeze a bit. Breathing became painful and, at first, I didn't know why until I gradually got a whiff of smoke, cigarette smoke. None of my coworkers smoked and I don't know if I'm allergic or intolerant to cigarette smoke, but I instantly feel ill whenever I begin breathing it in. I shrugged it off and watched my breathing, being sure nothing bad was happening to me, and not soon after my boss grabbed his coat and began to leave. He said, "Your coworker will be coming in a bit just to pick some stuff up," and as he opened the door, the scent of smoke burst through and on the ground were cigarette butts from what he said. Thus, he continued with, "And let's have you lock the door behind me too." I couldn't agree more. That was creepy. But if it was the man who used our bathroom, it wasn't too strange to assume he'd hunkered at the bottom of the stairs to take in some smoke before leaving. When my boss left, I made extra sure that the door was locked before continuing with my work. Another hour had passed by, about an hour and a half remaining of work when I began to smell smoke again. My heart sank as I turned my eyes to the door and quietly got up from my chair. I usually took off my shoes at work. Like I said, we didn't have clients come there. We were pretty chill when it came to wardrobe, but even with them off, I tiptoed over to the door and pressed my ear against it. I didn't hear anything at first, however, the scent of smoke was prominent there. For one reason or another, I decided just to go back to my desk and wait until my coworker got there. Not 10 minutes more in though, I heard this click, click, click sound. It was subtle and I had to look around to spot where it was coming from. It was the doorknob of our office. From where I sat, I could see it just slightly jerk back and forth. The person was doing it slowly as I was sure they were trying to be quiet. By this point, I called up my coworker to come sooner. In some ways, I felt safe. I was in a locked area after all, but who knows, right? After calling him though, the scent began to diminish and the doorknob stopped moving. I tried to listen for someone going up the stairs. I didn't hear anything for a long while until I heard someone coming down them. It was my coworker. He came in and said, "There are like 10 cigarette butts out here." I explained further what had happened as he came in and locked the door himself. I also explained the man who'd come in to use our bathroom prior. Like I said, I couldn't be sure if they were the same person. There wasn't much to take from the offices. The computers were fairly old, wouldn't at all get a good chunk of money from them, and everything else was paper. We weren't at all at a place that kept money around. So if it was him, I can't fathom what he saw that he'd feel the need to come back in to steal. My coworker somewhat brushed it off. He figured that the person was gone, all was fine, and went to pick up what he needed to. He ended up staying for a while, I'm not sure why, perhaps he felt like he needed to, because as I began finally finishing up my work, the smell of smoke came back. My coworker and I looked at each other, almost as a way to confirm that we both smelled it. The click-clacking of our computer stopped and we just waited and waited and waited. We didn't take our eyes off each other as the click, click, click came back. I just didn't want to deal with this and go home as soon as possible, but I shirked the thought of walking out there. My coworker was far more fed up. He stood, stomped to the door, unlocked it, and opened it. There was a man there. I didn't get a good look at him. I saw him raise his arm, freeze, and then he disappeared and sprinted up the stairs. My coworker walked me to my car soon after, told our boss about it, and we made it a rule that we always lock the door from that point on. Especially me, because after that day, every now and then, I'd smell smoke and hear the doorknob attempt to twist. Whenever I did, I either called up my boss or waited every now and then I heard the steps leave. Frankly, we should have put a camera up or called the police, something at least. When my coworker described him to my boss, it seemed like he was the same man who used our bathroom, but that is just speculation. We have no idea what he wanted or if there was a purpose. Be careful letting people use bathrooms. They could have ulterior motives. When I was about 8 or 9, my family took a trip skiing to a small resort a couple of hours from where we lived in Spain. The resort itself was a sleepy little town of about 400 to 500 people max, with a few small supermarkets and hotels, and not much else. Typically, we picked the worst time possible to embark on the trip, which we had been planning for a good few years. The night after we arrived there was a blizzard, and so we spent the first half of the week locked in the hotel. Although we were able to go outside for the remaining few days, we had little to do given that the slopes were shut. The story I want to tell comes from those first few days locked in the hotel. Despite my parents' annoyance at the timing of the trip being a nightmare, myself and my sister, who was 11 months older, were having a fantastic time. Locked up in the mountains with nothing to do, we were able to spend our days running around the hotel, eating sweets and watching the TV in the lobby. I should probably mention at this point that the hotel was somewhat of a maze. The large bar restaurant area where my parents sat each day reading was at the center of the hotel. The myriad of smaller rooms then connected to the bar area at random points, shooting off in different directions. These rooms often had no discernible function. Each one had the same mahogany interior, and they were full of couches, fireplaces, and antiques that allowed for great games of hide and seek. The rooms would often have offshoots themselves, connecting to new rooms which would then connect to yet more useless wooden caves. As such, it was possible to be 4 or 5 rooms away from the main hotel area at any one time, without knowing exactly where you were or how to get back. Anyway, at some point along the weekend, myself and my sister decided to play hide and seek. Bearing in mind the above, it was almost an impossible challenge to find the hider. At one point in the game, I was just about to give up on searching for my sister until I heard her voice from what sounded like a few rooms away. After successfully navigating the web of rooms, I emerged to find her sitting on a couch alongside a German man with gray hair, probably in his 60s if I had to guess. As soon as I emerged into the room, the man turned to me and told me he was taking my sister to the swimming pool and asked if I wanted to come. I remember immediately thinking it was odd that there was a swimming pool that we hadn't heard of. My parents had been complaining that morning about how much TV we were watching, and so I was sure they would have taken us there if they had known about it. And besides, the hotel did not seem of the size to be able to host one. I told the man that I have to ask my parents first, and told my sister to come back with me to find them. He immediately replied that I should go and that he should take my sister on ahead. I told my sister that she absolutely had to come with me, but excited at the thought of the swimming pool, she said she didn't want to. We began to argue, with the man taking my sister's side and encouraging me to go ask my parents permission whilst he waited with my sister. I dug my foot in, telling my sister that our parents would be very cross if we went somewhere on our own. And after a few minutes bickering, she eventually gave in and came back with me, giving her assurance to the man that we'd come back. Of course, when we told our parents, they were livid. My dad went back to the room to try and find the man, but with all the offshoots and given that all the random rooms looked the same, it was almost impossible to be sure that we were in the right one. In any case, there was no sign of him. I remember my dad screaming at the hotel lobby that he needed a list of all male guests and their room numbers, but of course they wouldn't give it to him. We spent the rest of the trip by our parents' side, terrified at the thought of being locked up in a blizzard with him. Thankfully, we never saw the man again. My mom and I normally shopped at the market just a few minutes away from our house. My mom had been shopping there for 20-some years at this point and was friends with most of the workers, so I was friendly with them too, and was always happy to talk to them. Whenever my mom got distracted talking to someone, I, with the attention span of a 6-year-old, would wander around the aisle. My mother would keep an eye on me to make sure I didn't get too far, but if she was distracted, one of the employees would usually be around and gently guide me back over. One day though, we went to a different market that I couldn't remember having been to before, and we didn't go back to for nearly a decade. We were walking around the aisles when my mom ran into her friend. They started talking, and I, not realizing that I no longer had a store full of adults keeping an eye on me, started wandering around the aisle. My eyes caught some colorful display, I think flowers or balloons or something, and went over to look. Once I was satisfied with my inspection, I turned back to the aisle only to find my mom wasn't there. That had never happened before. I looked around a little, though not moving from my spot near the colorful displays. Since it was right near the registers, there was a decent amount of people nearby, which I'm thankful for now. As I was looking around, an employee came up to me. He was older than my sister, she was 12 or 13 at the time, and younger than my dad, in his mid-40s, which was about the only way I could gauge age. Now, I would say he was probably in his early to mid-20s if I remember right. "Hi there," he said sweetly, in that tone you normally speak to kids in. I cheerfully said hello, actually stepping a little closer. "Are you looking for mommy?" I say yes, happily explaining that I had last seen her talking to her friend and that I could normally find her easily when I wandered away, so I wasn't sure where she could have gone. "Does she leave you alone often?" "Not really. My older sister was normally with me if my mom wasn't. She was 12 or 13 and she was super mature, so if my mom had to leave her for a little bit, she knew I'd be okay. But she never left us alone in public, just at home if she needed to run somewhere, never for very long, and my dad was at work a lot and didn't come back until late usually." "Where do you live?" "Well, you wouldn't know it, I just learned my address. We just learned how to mail a letter in school, even took a little class trip to the mailbox in our school corner to send them out. I knew how to write my address now, and I knew how to say it." "Where do you go to school? Who picks you up?" "Well, I go to the local elementary school. I don't know the address though, sorry, but I know which street it's on because I wait on the sidewalk for my mom or daycare sitter, depending on the day, so I see the street sign a lot since I'm usually waiting for a while to be grabbed." It had only been a few minutes since I last saw my mom. Even with how much information I was dumping, I was a very fast talker, but I was starting to get a little antsy. Not because I was uncomfortable talking to a stranger, but because I had skipped lunch that day specifically to calm my mom into letting me get a bagel from the store next door, which is why we were at the market in the first place. My mom was holding onto the bagel to make sure I didn't try to eat it too fast and choke, which I had done several times in the past. I wanted my bagel, and while I liked talking to this grown man who made me feel smart and was oh so interested in my life, I liked bagels more. Plus, if I caught my mom when we were near the bakery section, I might be able to use my charm and get a cookie. So I gotta find my mom now. "Oh well, I'll walk around with you and help you find her. You wouldn't lead me through the market you work at where you can easily bring me to the back room, meat locker, or any number of places?" "Yeah, sounds good." Ozzy. I look around to see my mom, the relieved look on her face slowly changing into something more anxious. I smile happily and wave her over. She immediately grabs my hand and I could tell she wants to chide me, probably for leaving the aisle, but she seems more occupied on the man in front of me. Before I can even open my mouth to introduce him, or remember that I never got his name, he quickly says that he's glad I found my mom and he needs to get back to work, and practically runs to the back of the store. My mom puts her hands on my shoulders and looks me in the eye, her expression a lot more worried now. "What was he talking to you about?" she asked, her voice more serious than I'd ever heard her. "Can I have my bagel?" My mom opens her mouth, pauses, and goes into her purse to hand me my bagel. Between bites, I happily tell her about the conversation and everything I remembered. My age and grade, pickup schedule, likes and dislikes, my literal address. My mom gradually became paler, then became red with anger. She brought me over to the manager, and I don't remember much about the conversation. The police weren't called. We went home, and my mom told me I wasn't allowed to walk around the store anymore. No more talking to any stranger, even if they worked at the store we were at, unless she was with me. If I ever saw that man ever again, I was to run away, find someone I know, and ask for help. If all else fails, scream at the top of my lungs. If my mom hadn't found me, something bad might have happened. If not in the store, then in front of my school, and if not in front of my school, then my house. A little over a decade later, I've never seen the guy again. Let's keep it that way. I had started hanging out with a very nasty crowd. They loved to party, never had their own cash, destructive, impulsive, you get the drill. An ex-friend of mine, we'll call him Bob, started hanging out with me quite a bit more and more as the weeks passed by. Bob worked as a pizza delivery driver. He never washed his clothes, to which he owned maybe 3 outfits, including his work uniform and only women's clothes. The women's clothes he wore to be punky. I saw no shame in that. Even thought it was kinda cool how he didn't care what others thought about it. But that also means he liked my clothes, so like a little sister might do, he constantly took my clothes. Keep in mind, he also barely showered. Often, he even woke up before 5 p.m. in time for work. He jumped off my couch, took a pack of my cigarettes without asking, and sped off. Within the 4-month period he stayed in my home, I literally saw him go to take a shower about 5 times. Long after the situation was dealt with and he was gone, I left that home with a stench. He paid nothing, not a single bill, never contributed to groceries, cleaning, nothing, nor was he on my lease. Yet, he established residency in my home legally. It didn't bother me so much at the time. I was at my rock bottom and was basically just happy to have someone be there with me. I considered him to be my goofy and annoying best friend, until that wasn't enough for him. He began to become obsessed with me. Very quickly he went from basically having everything he needed in life for free, while he kept any money or tips he made, but decided on his own accord that we were to be together. If I'd return home from work, friend's house, etc., he'd cry and follow me room to room, asking repeatedly why we can't just be together. That we were best friends already, we should date. I was not attracted to him. Going through a divorce at the time, I did not want to ruin our friendship. It got to the point where I avoided going home. I'd stay with my mother or friends because he'd cry and follow me, desperately trying to convince me to be with him. I'd almost often find him in my bed at this point, and he quit his job to have a better chance of seeing me. I had told him if this continued, I would no longer allow him to crash there. At one point, after avoiding him for a few days, Bob really started to come out of his shell. He cornered me screaming, "I'm sick and tired of being rejected by you. It's not happening anymore." Now I was scared. I never saw him as a threatening individual before, just a goofy character. I asked him to leave and he was no longer welcome. He refused. He said by law, he was required a 30 days notice to be evicted. When I spoke with the police, they understood my situation, but explained he'd either have to be evicted or I'd have to get a restraining order. I filed the restraining order, which they immediately granted me, but he chose to ignore it. Once he left my home, I locked all doors and windows. When he returned, I showed him the order, to which he replied, "I'm not leaving." I tried calling the police every time he showed up, but by the time they'd get there, he was gone. There were shoe prints on the door and cracks from all the attempts he made to force it open. It never shut correctly after those attempts, and they were never able to officially serve him because they supposedly couldn't find him. I honestly believe they tried once, then gave up. I provided them with his plates, friends' addresses where he'd stayed, previous employment, everything needed. I'd stay up late, hear in his vehicle, it was very loud and easily identified, slowly drive by my home, staring at me, day and night. At one time, he even hid behind my front door, had a mutual friend knock, then jumped out, shoved the door open, and entered. Even went as far to message my young, underage nephew who he met maybe one time on Facebook to try and gain sympathy and convince him to get me to change my mind, crossing even more obvious boundaries. It was a living nightmare. Eventually, he moved on to his next obsession, and I was somewhat at peace. Several months later, he was on our local news for attempting to slit his ex-girlfriend's throat, and beating her until she was unconscious, until a neighbor brushed over and he fled. All I could think was how that could have been me. When I was 18, almost 10 years ago, I had a phone call that completely changed my life. I got woken up at almost 6 a.m. by an unknown number. I figured it was my boyfriend, now husband, since his phone number usually showed up as the famous unknown number. He usually called me before going to work at around 7:30 a.m., but sometimes he'd call me at 6ish if he wanted to talk to me while waking up. I answer, he says what's up, and I'm still half asleep but start talking. He tells me he has a little problem and that he wants to see me. Being 18 and the fact that I started dating him recently, I also was down for this. He tells me how he absolutely loved seeing me last weekend and how good I looked. He basically described what we had done during the weekend. If I remember properly, his parents weren't home for the weekend and we had the house and the car to drive around. And we had lots of fun obviously, and how much he loved some of the things I did to him. I replied and I was more and more awake and we were having a really good time. Then I noticed it was almost 7 AM, time where he usually takes a shower, eats, and gets ready to go out the door. And I basically ask him, so this is fun and all, but aren't you going to get ready for work? He replied with, no, I think I'll skip work today. How about I come over? Now the thing is, by then I was pretty awake, and although the voice that was talking to me was very similar to my boyfriend's, something threw me off. My boyfriend doesn't say, no, like this guy does. Besides, I knew that unless he was sick, my boyfriend would never skip work because he was scheduled on his shifts and missing his shift was a big deal that could get him fired. I kind of froze. He noticed it, so he said, oh babe, you're right, I should start getting dressed, so you want me to come over? By then I swear that his voice was back to my boyfriend's voice and I just felt silly. So what if he wanted to skip a day at work? Maybe he just wanted to see me. So I tell him, yeah, sure, come over, it will only be us here. He replied, great. Then he asked, where's your house? The last time I checked, I'm pretty sure my boyfriend knows where I live. He had been coming over for weeks now. I laugh it off and tell him, ha, you know where it is. That's when he laughed, and his laugh was absolutely not my boyfriend's laugh. I instantly ask him, you're not my boyfriend's name, are you? He said, can you just hang on please? I need to go grab something. Meanwhile, I get a text from my boyfriend. I figured that maybe this is just a sick joke. Maybe he coordinated it perfectly. Maybe he's sick and his voice doesn't sound the same. The text from my boyfriend said, at the subway, going to work now, love you. I texted him saying, why are you texting me? We are talking right now. At which point my actual boyfriend called. He was very confused at first and figured someone had hacked into his MSN. When I told him it was by phone, he reassured me that he absolutely did not call me and that whoever it was not him. He had to go as the subway train was there, but that he will call as soon as he was at work. Then, the other guy called back, I picked up and I asked him, who are you? What do you want? I pretty much went crazy on him. He said that his name was Mike, that we had met a long time ago, which was impossible because my phone number was fairly recent, and that he just wanted to have fun, that he didn't know I had a boyfriend. I asked him how did he know that I was wearing and what did we do and how he got my phone number. He just said, where are you? Why don't we meet? At which point I hung up. He called again, I didn't answer. Within minutes, I had called my mom to tell her what happened. She told me to change my phone number and not to stay home alone. I changed my phone number right away. I also alerted local police. They opened a file, but nothing ever came out of it. I still wonder how he knew what we did and what I was wearing. My boyfriend swore at the time he would never let any of his friends know all that, but his parents' house did have lots of windows and we weren't exactly careful. So Mike, let's never meet again. This happened while I was in college, 5 years ago. I was a transfer student and was 21 at the time. I was set up to be living in a building that was for students 21 or older and moved in a week and a half before classes began. This school was in northern Michigan, so when I first arrived, campus was dead. I mostly kept to myself, but was friendly with a few people in my building, namely, one guy named Khalil, an exchange student from Lebanon. He seemed nice enough, though there was a distinct language barrier, so things were easily lost in translation. Our RD and RA, resident director, resident assistant, made everyone who had moved in have a meeting to go over basic rules and whatnot. At the end of the meeting, as I'm leaving the rec room, Khalil suddenly puts his arm up on the wall in front of me, almost clotheslining me. Caught off guard, I am peeved and creeped out about this. He begins explaining that he would like to be my friend and would like to go out for dinner to get to know me. He worded it oddly, so I wasn't sure if it was just a date or just a friendly invitation, but I attributed it to his bad English. Like an idiot, I felt cornered physically and socially. I am awful with confrontation and could be too nice, so I agreed. He meant right then and there, however, and said, I will get us a taxi and we'll go now. 10 minutes later, we're getting into this taxi, and as I'm entering, I feel this sense of dread. I think, I barely know this guy, and Hudson's, the restaurant, is a couple miles away and we will be stranded out there with this stranger if it gets weird. As we drive, my guard rises higher and higher. He wants to know everything about me, and is throwing questions rapid fire. My age, dating history, physical preferences in men, religion, family, everything. I am thinking, this is going to be really awkward, and wanted the night to be over before we even get to the restaurant. At the restaurant, we both look at the menu for a bit. The waiter comes and takes my order, salad, small and quick to eat, and then the waiter asks what Khalil wants. He says, oh no, I'm not hungry, I just want to watch her eat. What? Why would you ask me for dinner if you weren't hungry? And why did you just want me to eat? I was horrified. All of my family was in the lower peninsula of Michigan, 8 hours away. I had no friends up here. The only local numbers I had were of my RA and RD. I speed eat all of my salad as Khalil watches me, now talking about himself. He tells me about how he has anger problems and is looking for a woman to help calm him, but still be a submissive traditional wife. I am trying to hide the horror and uneasiness as I nod and eat. He continues explaining how he was known for his temper back home, and how his brothers have stopped him from doing awful things. At this point, red flags blinding my vision. It's time to end this. I finish my food and tell him to get a taxi back to campus. I intentionally sat in front of the taxi. I wasn't allowing the possibility of physical contact. When we get to the campus, we get in the building and I say a quick thank you and haul back to my room. Door locked, I get into my sweats and try to chalk it up to a weird experience and vow to avoid Khalil from then on. Around 12:30 a.m., I hear a knock on my door. I was watching Netflix and took out my earbuds to make sure I was hearing right. The knocking continues. Not a courteous knock knock knock, but a closed fist pounding. I am petrified and making as little noise as possible. Get to the door and look out the peephole. I see Khalil. My room is at the very end of a long hallway. All rooms around me empty at this point, with the door outside of my room leading to a parking lot surrounded by woods. Knowing how isolated I was, I slink away from the door, making zero noise just waiting for the knocking to stop. About a minute later, it stops. He growls, "I know you're in there. I will wait." My eyes widen in horror. I felt a mixture of rage and panic, but decided that confronting him then wouldn't be smart. So I quietly watched Netflix until I fall asleep. I have no idea how long he waited out there. The next morning, when I finally emerged from my room, I found a couple of pages taped to my door. 3 handwritten pages from Khalil, explaining his feelings for me and his intentions of making me his wife. I went straight to my RA and explained everything that happened. She agreed to meet with Khalil herself, to explain to him how inappropriate he was being, and to tell him to leave me alone. He didn't. Notes kept coming. He came to my door dozens of times a day, and I became pretty much trapped in my room hiding from this psycho. It lasted for 8 days, but classes began and Khalil disappeared. I was told he dropped out and moved back to Lebanon. I found it eerie how he just vanished. Had he come here solely to find a wife, I'll never know. But Khalil, let's not ever meet again. It was the middle of the afternoon and I was home from college for the weekend, driving home from an auto shop, having just picked up my car after some repairs. It suddenly started making a loud grinding noise. My car was very old, things were always going wrong, so I pulled into a shopping center parking lot and called my parents for advice on whether I should take it back to the shop or get a tow. I know very little about cars. My mom told me she would come and meet me at the shopping center and we'd figure it out. At this point, my phone battery was also dying, so my phone shut off after the call. As I was hanging out in the parking lot, a guy pulled over on the street in front of me, rolled down his window, and asked me for directions. I did my best to direct him, but instead of taking off, he then pulled into the parking lot and got out of his car. I found that a bit weird. It was broad daylight, I was in front of a shopping center, cars were driving by constantly, it's not like it was nighttime in an abandoned alley. So the guy started to make what seemed like small talk and I complied, still not understanding what he wanted. He introduced himself and asked what my name was and I offered my first name. He asked what I did. I said I was a student studying art. He asked where I went to school and I told him. He asked how old I was. He made a little more small talk and then I guess seeing that I was a bit more relaxed, he said he was a sculptor and that if I was interested in art, I would love the sculptures he had at his house. He said we would go there right now and look at them. Immediately that dull alarm in the back of my head got turned way up. I was young and naive, but I knew enough to never ever get in a stranger's car and immediately felt very uncomfortable. Though he knew how old I was, I looked extremely young. I started to put 2 and 2 together. He was getting increasingly more insistent that I get in his car and go to his house. He reached for my arm and at that point everything is a blur. I yelled that I had to go and ran from my car into the nearest store. It was a tiny game store so there weren't really anywhere to hide, but I told the cashier about the guy and asked if I could wait in there until my mom showed up. The cashier assured me the man would not be let in the store and that he and his coworker would keep an eye on me until the man was gone. I also asked them if I could use their phone to call my mom and let her know what was going on since mine had died. I kept watching the guy outside by my car, worried he would try to come in, but as soon as he saw me use the store's phone, he got in his car and took off. I wish the story ended there. The whole encounter really shook me up, but as I reflected on it, I realized, through the questions the man had asked, he had my first name and exact birth date by asking how old I was and getting my birthday. He also knew where I went to school, though thankfully it was several hours away from my hometown where I encountered the man. I asked a friend of mine what kind of info he could get based on what he had, and much to my distress, my friend showed me he was able to find out my full name, my phone number, and my home address with the info I had given the man. I felt like such an idiot. I had always been taught to be wary of strangers and not give them personal info, and I was baffled by how easily this guy had gotten personal info out of me just by pretending to have a casual conversation. Nothing happened for a few weeks and I started to stress less, and stopped thinking about the encounter, and stopped worrying about running into the man again. Then one early morning my cell phone rang. The number was restricted. I answered. There was heavy breathing on the phone, but no reply. I hung up. It happened again the next morning. This time a man answered, asking, "What are you doing right now?" I said I was trying to sleep. "What are you wearing?" I immediately hung up. The calls continued. The next time I picked up, I told him if he called again, I'd call the police. I got a few more calls from a restricted number after that, but stopped answering, and eventually they stopped. I'm still not sure if the calls were from the man I met in the parking lot, but it seemed likely. It was just too much of a coincidence they started after that encounter. I spent a good year being afraid of that man. I still can't believe how foolish I was giving him info about myself so easily, and it was an important lesson in how smooth and sneaky creeps can be, and now I'm much more careful about what I say to strangers. I still don't know what he had planned if I had actually been foolish enough to get in his car, but I'm very glad I never found out. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. When I was 18, I worked in my college's residence building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half of the 3rd floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with the hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all the doors were powered by 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m. and said he left his key card in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys remade as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary key card and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key for his room and asked if he was a student or hotel guest, and he replied student. At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easily at this job, but quickly learned not. Later on the night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again, and he said no. The door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I had changed the batteries, and I went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name, and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with the master key, and I told him I'd have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, "No, it's okay, I'll close it," and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed the batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, and some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe it was also just a language barrier issue. At this point though, I really felt like something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it, there was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, "I have a key, go get it," and threw it under the bed. He said there was a leak under the fridge. He just kept trying to get me down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no. I'd send maintenance up in the morning to take a look at it if anything was broken. I had my back to him and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said, "No, I need them to see." His tone of voice changed. In the most steady, chilling manner, he said, "Ella, it's okay, you can take them off." And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away and, trying to remain composure, said, "No thanks, I need to keep them on," even though he was creeping me out. I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me, or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped toward the door to close it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with the little wispy hairs at the top of my forehead and tried to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focus on getting out of there. He once again tried getting me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the door frame to see if I could spot any actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets in the bed, nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking he had just arrived today and hadn't got a chance to buy anything yet. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed. and quickly gathered the door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed. You need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew he wasn't a resident. He tore the corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried convincing them he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which I decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. Obviously he didn't. That's why I called you guys crying and terrified. He kept interjecting to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for a student card and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by, as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said, "across the street." One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months ago later and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked what his purpose was to be sneaking into a room, he just kept up the ums and the uhs and saying he didn't know. They'd ask, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anybody who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know, no reason, I was just here." At one point he tried to tell them he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out that the room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, a housekeeper came to the desk and told me they found the door deadbolted open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found out. I never saw him again, and to this day, I still have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter, and overnight shifts still give me the creeps. The lesson I took from the story was always read through your lease/rental agreement fully before signing. This takes place 4 years ago in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm originally from California, so trading up city life for a less urban life was very challenging for me. Making friends was hard, but I made the move to be with my dad, who lived in an apartment complex with a roommate. My dad was a trucker, so he was gone for weeks at a time, while I was left alone to work and come home to a foreign place that I was slowly being accustomed to. My roommate was gone most of the time because he had a girlfriend, and he would leave his dog with me, so I never truly felt alone. I had an old lady for a neighbor that would come up and check on me too. That's how people were in that area, and I found it kinda nice how people knew their neighbors. I got to know everyone in my building's name after about 6 months of living there, except one. There was a man, I'd say in his early to mid-50s, who lived directly below my apartment. He looked, for lack of a better description, like a creep. He was balding except for on the sides of his head, which that hair was straggly too. He was tall and kinda skinny, had outdated 90s glasses, and a thick mustache. He was the only person in the building who wasn't friendly, or at least didn't make the effort to say hello or introduce himself to me. He also happened to be the maintenance man for all 5 buildings. I didn't think much of this at first. I honestly don't care if you're overly friendly to me. I enjoy having space of my own, and sometimes being too friendly is suspicious to me. That's just a personal problem, but I'm explaining why I didn't send up any red flags at first. One day when I was pulling out of the driveway to go to work in the morning, I noticed across the large lawn that led to the door to our buildings, the maintenance man was standing in the center, staring directly at me. Stare is the wrong word, more like glare. At first, I looked around confused, thinking perhaps he was looking at someone or something behind me. I was the only one there. Although a bit creeped out, I shrugged it off and continued with my day, forgetting all about it. The next day I was over at my neighbor Claire's apartment, the elder lady, and she happened to bring up a maintenance issue she had, but she mentioned that she would never ask the maintenance man for anything, and neither should I. I tried to ask her more about what she meant by that, but she ended up being very broad and said something along the lines of, "He's just a known creep around here." Fast forward to the first incident. It was around 2 AM and I was still awake, but only barely, sitting on the couch watching TV alone in the apartment. I was starting to drift off into sleep when I heard a soft noise near the front door. Thankfully, the show was very low in volume, because I normally don't pick up on quiet noises most of the time. I turned off the TV and began listening. Next to the living room on the right side is the patio area, and on the left is the kitchen and the front door. The light from the moon and outside lamps were flooding through the patio glass door, so I could see the doorknob to the front door moving, not just moving, but someone was using a key. In an instant, the door flung open and I was on my feet, with nowhere to hide at that point. I stood my ground and saw the silhouette step into the kitchen. That's when I saw it was the maintenance man. My stomach dropped and he stopped dead in his tracks when he spotted me, looking as if it was unexpected to find me awake. I noticed he had a large coat on, even though it wasn't winter or even cold that particular night. I noticed that only because the jacket looked bulky, as if he was carrying things in it that I couldn't see. "What are you doing?" was all I managed to squeak out. I was shaking, my knees feeling like they were about to give out. For reference, I was a 22-year-old woman standing a whopping 5'4", with no way to defend myself at all from where I was standing. He looked shocked, which made me feel like I had gained a little power from the situation. He retorted confusedly and angrily with, "Your toilet is making a loud noise that I could hear from my bedroom." I was angry and terrified, and only reacted with more anger when I saw him scrambling for excuses. "So you just let yourself into my apartment at 2 in the morning? I'm reporting this to management first thing in the morning." He stepped closer to me then. I backed up a few steps but still stood my ground, quickly turning on the light closest to me so he could see my fury. "The toilet is rumbling. I need to check it, now." Now I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. I had adrenaline and anger and fear all coursing heavily through my body. "Get out." He started to take the liberty to look around the kitchen where he was standing. My head immediately thought, what if he goes for a knife? And that's when he said it. "I can come in whenever I want." The sentence makes me shiver to this day. I didn't know what to do, and felt the power over the situation quickly dwindling down to a bad feeling that something bad was about to happen. "If you don't get out of my apartment now, I'm gonna start screaming as loud as I can." My voice was crackling and shaky, which made my heart drop into my stomach. I immediately felt like I was gonna be sick when he took yet another step forward towards me. "Check the lease. I could come in whenever I want. I'll see you later." He winked at me, creating a wave of nausea, and I felt faint. He slowly turned around and walked out, closing the door behind him and even going far enough as to lock it from the outside with his extra key. The next day, I contacted management as soon as their office opened. I could tell the conversation wasn't going anywhere when the manager sounded irritated right off the bat. When I told her that the guy entered my apartment illegally, she cut me off and told me that they do not allow any illegal activity, and take what I was saying very seriously. I thought, yes, I've got him, until the manager said, "You can't just throw around accusations without proof. This man has dedicated over 20 years to working for this company, and we don't plan on getting rid of him anytime soon. Perhaps if you had read over your lease like you should have," yes, she was actually scolding me, "you would have seen the clause that states that a maintenance worker has keys to the entire property, and if there is a maintenance issue, they are permitted to access the property at any time of day." This floored me. It couldn't possibly be legal, but of course I'm from California, and of course I didn't read the lease carefully. When I moved there, my dad was already living in the apartment and I literally had nowhere else to go. So if I were to be living there, I was gonna have to sign the lease no matter what. So I did. Needless to say, nothing got done. Fast forward again, a few days go by and I don't see Mr. Maintenance Freak until I do. This time I'm pulling in after a long 10-hour shift at work. I haven't forgotten about the scary incident, but I put it in the back of my mind for the time being to concentrate on other things, although I lost sleep over it. I park my car facing the large lawn area again and start using my phone for a few minutes. I'm peering down on my phone and glance up for a split second before I see him there. He's standing across the lawn staring angrily at me. I mean furious. I quickly look back down and pretend I have not seen him, getting that sinking feeling again. As a paranoid person, I put the key in the ignition just in case and pretended to keep scrolling on my phone while subtly locking my door. I glance up again and this time he's walking towards me, very fast. I look in my rearview mirror, hoping to see someone that he may be stomping angrily towards, and of course no one else is there. It's nearly dark now, but when he gets about 10 to 15 feet away from the front of my car, I can hear him shouting something, but I can't make out what he's saying. Now I put my phone down and I'm watching him come right at me until he reaches my window and starts banging it all with his might, and slams his body into the door. He's also fidgeting angrily with the handle, even though the doors are locked. My car doesn't have automatic locks, so I'm praying that all my doors are locked at this point. My hands are shaking so bad that I'm having trouble starting the car. When I finally do, I realize what he's saying, which was a repeated cycle of the following phrases. "I'm going to get you. I told you I can come in whenever I want. You really want to take me on? I'll kill you." I peeled out of there so fast, not even knowing where to go. I drove to the next county over, found a motel, and stayed the night there. The next day, I took work off and went straight to the management's office. I told them exactly what happened, and no matter what I said, they didn't believe me. This maintenance man was apparently a gift to mankind or something. He was a monument to the company, and they appreciated his 20 years of service and dedication to them over him risking someone's life with threats. Long story short, I lost it. I called her psychotic and ended up getting evicted. I reported all this to the police, but between the lack of evidence I had and his perfect record / shining references from his employers that seemed to love him, the police said that there was nothing they could do to move forward at that point. My dad and I ended up finding a nice home about 10 minutes away from that place. I ended up inviting Claire, my older neighbor, to the new house a few months later. She told me there was a single woman in the apartment before the roommate, and my dad had moved in there that also left in a hurry after something happened with the maintenance man taking photos of her walking to and from her apartment to her car. When she confronted him about it, he told her, "I can do whatever I want." I guess in Kansas City, maintenance workers are considered gifts to mankind. Needless to say, it's been 4 years and I'm back in California. This happened when I was about 18 years old. I was big into running back then and lived in a town that was a suburb but had big swaths of farmland, as in smallish tomato and strawberry fields, not huge never-ending wheat fields. I preferred running on the dirt at the edges of these fields because it was a lot easier on my legs than running long distances on concrete or asphalt, and I was usually training for half marathons. This particular day I was planning to run an easy 6 miles. I told my mom and she suggested I do a loop and then meet them at the dog park about 3 miles from our house as my halfway point. This is pre-cell phone area, but being careful I took a walkie-talkie my dad always used and my mom took the other one. Now, the walkie-talkie had a range longer than the ones my brothers and I played around with when we were younger, but it definitely did not work 3 miles away and I honestly had no idea what its exact range was. So, I take off to my run. I'm planning to go on the sidewalk for a little bit until I get to the fields. I think it was lettuce or something then, but short small plants. I'm running in the dirt with the road a few yards to my left. I have to run south and then turn right onto a slightly smaller, less traveled road to get to the dog park. As I'm running on the first dirt part, my parents drive by and, being dorks, they honk and wave and yell at me. I wave and then soon after I make my turn onto the smaller road. This one is road, me on flat dirt, small drainage ditch, forever of lettuce field, then a wall that is the backyard of some houses. I start noticing how quiet the street is and how few cars are passing me. Then I randomly start thinking to myself, if someone tried to do something, I could run to those houses. Then I hear a car, but this one doesn't pass me like all the others. I hear it slow down so that it is behind me, just out of my peripheral vision. My senses go super alert and I immediately realize what an idiot I was to pick this route because I'm stuck out here with no one to help me and nowhere to hide. The car starts speeding up enough so that it's next to me and I glance over and see a man. Middle-aged, white, dark hair, totally normal looking, but I get a chill down my spine immediately. He sort of leans over into the passenger seat and says in a super sweet voice, "Hi, where are you going? Do you need a ride?" I am scared and realize that this is not good. Immediately, nothing has happened yet and he could be totally innocent just wanting to chat, but my intuition is in overdrive telling me I'm not safe. I hop over the ditch thinking at least that will make it harder for his car to follow me if I need to take off across the field to try and make it to those houses in the distance. Well, this pisses him off. He guns it and gets closer to the ditch and in front of where I am, and then he says in a voice I can only describe as bone-chillingly evil, "You know, you shouldn't be out here all alone. Something horrible could happen to you out here and no one would ever know where to find you." He put his car in park and is taking off his seatbelt when I remember the walkie-talkie. Piece of junk is all static because I'm too far away, so I immediately turn down the volume and say loudly, "Hey dad, yeah, I see your car. I'm over here by this red Buick. Do you see me?" Fake wave to no one. There was no car coming from the direction my parents were, and when I had started talking, there was no one behind us either. But by the grace of the universe at that exact moment, a car turned onto the road. The guy saw it, looked at me, and sped off so fast he left skid marks. I have never run faster in my life, and I was looking behind me every few seconds and thought he'd be waiting for me at every intersection I had crossed. I was shaking and I was scared and relieved when I got to the dog park. I told my parents everything and my mom called the cops. They took a statement but said it would just help if something actually happened to someone else. The weird part was, I was having trouble getting my story out and I was so upset, and before I gave a description of the car, the cop asked, "Was it a red Buick?" He wouldn't tell us why, but that just added to my feeling that I had narrowly escaped something awful. This was back in 2013 when I was living in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college on the west side near Times Square in K-Town. I was going through some tough times back then as I was unemployed at the time. I had a lot of time, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head time to time. One night, I was feeling exceptionally depressed, so I decided to walk to K-Town to grab a drink by myself. I walked into a Korean bar and I got some weird looks from the waiter as I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a couple of soju bottles, I was feeling pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. However, as I was exiting out of the bar, this Korean guy followed me. He looked very normal, just like a nice Korean guy. He told me that he saw me drinking at the bar by myself and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I got home safe. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was pretty close. but he insisted and he looked so harmless that I decided to take him up on his offer. We walked like 10 minutes I think, and it was quite pleasant. We were both a little drunk, but I remember talking about all sorts of things, nothing personal. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. Now, my apartment was a 5-story walk-up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to open to get into the building. No doorman. I didn't think much of it and inserted the key to open the door and went in. The door takes a while to close shut, and it was my mistake for not checking before I went up the stairs. While I was approaching the 2nd floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I literally got goosebumps all over my body, and I felt like I was in danger. As I started to pick up the pace, I heard the footsteps going faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor, and I started to run up, clutching my keys in my hand. The guy started to run up the stairs as well, and I can literally hear him getting closer and closer to me. This all happened in a couple of seconds, but it felt very long. I finally got to my floor, and as I tried to open the door, I looked back and literally saw the guy's head on the staircase. I rushed to open the door and I managed to close the door right on his face. My heart was beating so fast and I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 AM and my roommate was asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything, so I decided to just go to my room and hope that he's gone home. Around 7 AM, my roommate woke me up. She said that there is a man standing in front of our apartment door. My heart sank and I explained the whole situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed that we were going to call the police if he doesn't go home. I looked at the people and he told me that he will only go home if I gave him my number. We then called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment and called me a few minutes later. She told me that she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently, he tried to lie to the officers that I'm his girlfriend and that we got into a fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I do not have a boyfriend and that she doesn't know him at all. The police let him off with a warning. About 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it's the police? Surely it can't be him again, right? I answered the intercom and I was shook. It was him again. "Just give me your number and I'll go away," he said. I warned him that I'm going to call the police again if he doesn't leave. A couple of minutes later, I heard ferocious knocks on my door. He must have gotten in when someone was entering the building. I was so scared at that point, so I immediately called the police. Unfortunately, the guy ran away before the police got there. The worst part about this experience was that my roommate and I were so scared to leave and come back to our apartment. I would have anxiety every time I come home, worried that I might see him in front of our apartment door. For about a week, the police escorted us when we felt scared. Bless them. I never saw him again, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. So creepy stalker dude, let's not meet. I live with my girlfriend as expats in a pretty foreigner-friendly Asian country. Most of the time we get by just fine despite only knowing a little bit of the language, because most people we interact with on a day-to-day basis speak fluent English. We started out in a tiny apartment which we quickly outgrew. We found a gorgeous condo with nice amenities and decided to move in. This condo is owned and managed by a local owner rather than by an association or company. The building is a little bit older, which means that instead of key card access to our door, it came with a traditional key lock inside and bar latch, which is nice because it's more durable than a chain. Of note, our original building also had key card access to our floor, meaning that we could only ever access our own floor. Even the emergency exit stairwells did not allow entry to floors other than our own. This new place did not include this measure, and I routinely enjoyed a walk up the 15 flights of stairs to the room as a bit of a warm-up before going swimming. The quaint feeling of all of this changed about 2 months after we moved in. We were both starting new jobs and dragged our feet on some of the final touches of moving into a place. That is the last time we ever do that. My girlfriend nudged me awake at about 3 in the morning. I wake up extra groggy and unsure of my surroundings, but I snapped to full attention when she whispered with wide eyes, "Someone is trying to open the door." Now, the condo is 100 square meters, and the main door and the bedroom are at opposite ends. The bedroom itself has a rather sturdy door that was closed, and the aircon runs at night, so this had to have been some sort of commotion for her to wake up. I sprung out of bed and made it to the door in seconds. There was some guy outside our door, studying very intently at our lock. He was about my height, though probably 15 kilos heavier, and he was not a foreigner like us. "Wrong room," I had to yell, because the door is pretty thick. There was a pause and then a thud, then a smaller tock 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 as he was knocking. From experience, I know that it's hard to hear through the door, and if English was not his first language, then understanding me through the door was going to be a real challenge anyway. Looking through the people as he kept up steady knocking, I noticed he swayed back and forth slightly, so I figured he maybe had a couple drinks and had the wrong room. I turned to my girlfriend and told her so, and that I was going to open just the key lock but not the bar latch and tell him he had the wrong room. She didn't love the idea, but what was a good alternative? I took a deep breath and undid the key lock. My hand shook as I turned the handle, and one hand braced against the door while the other opened it slightly. He must have been leaning close because I saw his face right at the opening, and I could smell beer on his breath. "You've got the wrong," was what I got out before he pushed against the door as hard as he could. The bar latch held, but it was enough that my girlfriend threw herself against the door, and with our combined force we shut it again. "No," I yelled, "go away, wrong room." Then he muttered something that sent chills through me. The door muddled the noise, having just woken up played tricks on my ears, and the language barrier filled in the gaps. But I could swear I heard him laugh a little and say, "Stupid boy." I froze. My girlfriend turned the key lock as he slammed his body into the door once, twice, 3 times, I lost count. Every time I pressed against it harder, but I could still swear the 4 screws that held the bar latch in place wiggled slightly. The thuds returned, and looking through the peephole, I could see that he was punching the door. His stoic face looked patient and annoyed as he swung his arm back over and over each time it hit my girlfriend, and I could feel the vibration through our entire bodies. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped and I looked through the peephole. He wasn't there any longer. I listened closely and I could hear the long ding of the elevator down the hall. He might be leaving. My girlfriend had both our phones, texting the condo owner on hers and shoving mine at me. She was calling the owner, but at 3 AM there was no answer. Frantic text of "someone is trying to break in" spammed the other end when no one was picking up. She messaged friends of ours who live in the next building, but we both knew it'd be hours before anyone responded to us. We calmed down a bit and agreed that we were going to be up for the rest of the night, but that we'd settle up with the condo owner in the morning and report it to the building management. There were security cameras in the hallways, so they'd be able to follow up. Then I heard the elevator ding again. I was shaking as I returned to the peephole and watched as the chunky man returned. He was hanging up a mobile phone, and he retrieved something from his pocket, a knife, a multi-tool, and that's when I said, "He's back," and I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife within reach and reached to brace the door. My girlfriend was almost in a full-blown panic as she grabbed the cast iron skillet. That's when I realized for the first time that there was a chance that someone was going to die. The door handle was wiggling as he started to poke at the lock with whatever was in his pocket. If he opened one lock, the only thing between him and us would be 4 tiny screws on the bar latch. And if he got in this condo, we were going to defend ourselves as best as we could. And that's where I realized we were foreigners, and dealing with manslaughter charges in a foreign court system would be an absolute nightmare. Or if we severely injured him and he was able to communicate his story, his way to the police, while we struggled with an interpreter. And of course, this is all assuming that we would be the ones to overpower and subdue him. All this is running through my head as I called the equivalent of 911 and shouted English into the phone until someone spoke English. My brain wouldn't quiet down enough for me to be polite. I finally got an operator that spoke English, and I explained someone was trying to break into our condo, that he had left and returned, and gave him the address. He sent a car and asked for an ETA, and he couldn't give me one. He wandered off again, but my spider sense was in full alert mode. It wasn't until half an hour later when several people wearing police uniforms and building management jumpsuits knocked on the door that I calmed down even a little. Still, I wasn't sure what to expect. One of the groups spoke English while the rest stood back. I explained everything in detail and pointed at the camera in our hallway, saying I wanted whoever it was found. One of the cops pointed at the nearby knife and raised an eyebrow, and I just confidently said, "Yeah, I would have if I needed to." After assurances and apologies and promises of follow-up, we received what we should have collected weeks ago: direct phone numbers to our building security room where cameras are monitored, as well as the local police station and the personal mobile number of our building security director. The sun was coming up and our condo owner called my girlfriend to comprehend what was going on. She promised us that she'd sent locksmiths there that day to install another deadbolt as well as a second bar lock if it helped us feel safe. The follow-up of everything was that the guy was indeed someone who got drunk and mistook the room. It was on the wrong floor. His wife had to come collect him more than once, and he would be fined for the cost of installing the extra locks. So while it is a bit comforting to know that he's a random drunk instead of a burglar, I still explained to building management that I have no desire for an apology from him. I don't care if he feels bad. Police reports here can be messy and locals can hold severe grudges that I did not want to deal with. I will only keep from a full police report if I literally never see or hear from him again. So just as some background, I am male and currently 25 and still living within 15 miles of my old house. This happened when I was about 8 or 9, making my sister at the time 5 or 6. We lived in a quiet neighborhood that, once I grew up, I found out was actually a lower income part of town. However, we had some wonderful neighbors, and it was thanks to these neighbors that a lot of potentially negative situations were avoided. At the time, my dad was working an 8 AM to 8 PM job, and my mother was a secretary at a hospital, which meant that during the day she was often at work. Usually my sister and I had a babysitter, but once I reached about 8 or 9, I began to be old enough to look out for us without a babysitter. Now mind you, this was the 90s, which certainly were not safe but were much safer than they are now. Also, we had the previously mentioned neighbors who generally did a good job of keeping an eye on us in our house. This particular incident was one of the first times I was charged to babysit for my sister. She was in her high chair eating whatever my mom had left for us when I got a knock on our front door. And this was strange since we never got visitors on a regular basis, other than the boy across the street who would want us to come out and play, but he usually just yelled my name while knocking. I was young and naive and decided to open the door. There was a locked screen door beyond that. I left that closed and locked. Outside was a middle-aged man. I hardly remember his facial features or even body type. I remember his yellow shirt and dirty jeans. "Can I help you?" I asked innocently, no alarm bells going off yet. "Hey there, are your parents home?" Alright, first alarm bell. My parents teaching me not to trust strangers rushed through my head, but I still didn't quite fully grasp the potential danger here. My mom went to the store, she'll be back any minute. Weird half lie. I could have said she was here but in the shower or that she was laying down upstairs. I'm glad I didn't tell him that she wouldn't be back for quite a few hours, but looking back it's scary how naive I was. "Well, that's no problem. Hey, so look, my dog went missing and I think it went into your backyard. Do you mind if I can come in and we can go check it out?" Okay, so I might have been dumb, but I wasn't that dumb. There was no way I was letting this stranger into my house, especially with my sister there. She was my first thought. Sure, I didn't want to have any harm follow me, but she was my sister and it was my job to keep her safe. I should have closed the door right then and there, but once again I went with the less safe but still not totally stupid route. Well, the gate should be unlocked. If you want to go check the backyard, you can. And promptly closed the door. Now, of course I was very curious if there was a stray dog in my backyard. Dogs are great. Even with the weird guy being around, I was pretty interested to see how his search in the backyard went. So I decided to go check the back window and see if there was actually a dog and, if so, if the man would catch it. Now at this point, I am sure you have figured out that there was no dog. And when I looked out the back window, I could see almost the entire yard, including the gate. The man wasn't there. This was mere seconds after I had closed the door on him. I waited for a few minutes, but he never showed up. After about 5 minutes, there was another knock on my door. This time I was much more wary and I didn't like this guy showing up. I was pretty tired of the whole ordeal, but I still hadn't fully grasped the situation. I kept the chain lock on the door and cracked it open. "Did you find your dog?" Again, I can't remember his facial features, so I can't really recall his expression, but I remember his tone was a bit desperate as well as annoyed. "No, I looked all over the yard and I couldn't find him. I have a picture in my car if you want to take it just in case you see him." Nope, no more. I still didn't understand abduction, but I certainly was not going to go anywhere outside of the house with a stranger. I told him that he can leave a picture in the mailbox and we will keep an eye out. Once again promptly closing the door. What followed is what really creeps me out to this day. Looking back, I was freaked out that I had to come that close to exposing my sister and myself to danger, but this really scared me. Suddenly there was more knocking on my door. Not the screen door separating the door itself. Like I mentioned previously, the screen door was locked and unless that was open, it was impossible to knock on the door itself. It freaked me out and I took my sister to my bedroom and crept back out to the kitchen where I could see out onto the front yard and saw the man quickly getting back into his car while my saint of a next door neighbor Joan stood on our front lawn smoking and watching him intently. It took a long time for me to add it all up and honestly, I had forgotten about it for a long time. When I finally remembered it all, I couldn't even believe my own memories. Either way, Mr. Yellow Shirt Man, yeah, let's not ever meet again. Also, thank you Joan wherever you are. You saved me on multiple occasions and I didn't even know it. When I was in 4th grade, my family was still living in Denver, Colorado in a small condo near my school. My brother, kindergartner at the time, and I only had to cross the street and walk between a couple of apartment buildings to get to the football field attached to our school. It was normally a pretty quick and safe trip to and from. My mother was taking night classes at NAU at the time, and her boyfriend, whom we lived with, would usually watch us in the evenings, although he wasn't off work until about 6:30 p.m. We grew up as latchkey kids, so this wasn't a big deal. One day, my brother and I were walking home together after school like we'd usually do and had just gotten to the street in front of our home when a white car pulled up in front of us. The man driving the car didn't seem like your typical weirdo, maybe in his late 20s and looking pretty clean cut. Looking back, the fact that he was driving such a fancy car, a Benz I believe, and wearing such a crisp outfit didn't really fit with our neighborhood. He asked my brother and I if our parents were home. I immediately got a serious sensation of stranger danger from this dude. I looked at our apartment across the street, then back at him, and in the most I'm not stupid tone I could find, I asked why. "It doesn't matter," he replied dismissively. "Are they home?" He seemed a little more insistent with his question and glanced around. Yep, despite fully knowing they were not home and that my mom's boyfriend wouldn't be able to be there for another 2+ hours, I figured it was better to lie and say yes. "What are they doing?" he asked, really looking us over. I then turned to my brother and ordered him, "Let's go," but he wouldn't follow me. I went to grab his hand and he quickly withdrew with a sharp no and looked back at the guy. The guy then looked at both of us and then back to my brother, and with a facial expression that made my hair stand on end, he said, "Come closer, I have something for you." My brother started walking to the door of the car, and the guy was reaching with his hand out, nothing in it, like he was about to grab him. I grabbed my brother's coat immediately and started hauling him towards our apartment as fast as I could. He was screaming for me to let him go, but I was terrified, so I just kept dragging him. The guy quickly put his car into gear and literally peeled out of there. My mother's friends started picking us up from school after that, and a PSA was issued to the community. I still get a little creeped out when cars slow down near me while I'm outside walking. Potential child abductor, let's not meet again. Alright, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this compilation. Let me know down in the comments below if you want to hear another one of these compilations every once in a while. But as always, have a nice day.